What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto fell in love with the daughter of the kami? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto was being trampled and bruised before the Anbu finally decided to show up, but when they did the beating was already over. After the crowd had dispersed, the Anbu unit left the area as if their only duty was to just make sure he didn't die. The blonde boy began curling himself up and his eyes began welling up with tears as he simply cried there, letting all his emotions out. Why, what did I do? He sobbed as he picked himself up. You did nothing wrong my child, he heard a feminine voice say. Naruto whipped his head to the noise in fear of another beating but felt a blush crawling up into her face at what he saw. What stood there was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. It was a raven-haired beauty. She had long luscious hair that stopped at the small of her back and her face was motherly and loving, but didn't lose any of her and feminine qualities. She had curves that seemed to go forever and long never-ending legs alongside perky and firm. You don't need to even touch it to know how perfect they must feel, and Naruto was just a kid. He didn't even know what to even do with those. She was wearing the most dazzling red dress he had ever seen with a golden dragon swirling around her midriff with the head resting on her shoulder. Kami looked at Naruto amused at his dazed expression and giggled to herself. Now Naruto, what are you looking at? She asked, hands on her hip and cocked to one side while raising an eyebrow. Naruto just shook his head of any thoughts that shouldn't be there and fought furiously against the blush to look at the woman before him. Kami made her way to Naruto with elegance and grace only one of regal birth can achieve. Naruto, sweetie, do you know who I am? Kami asked, her voice warm and motherly. Naruto shook his head no, not at all trusting his voice to say anything. I am Kami. A lump formed in his throat. Kami? Naruto said, his voice high and in disbelief. Kami just nodded her head and looked into his eyes with shame and sadness. Naruto, I want you to know that Konoha's end is nigh. For years I have looked upon this village with nothing but disgust but held back because of your mother and you father, and also because of you. Even though they hurt you, you still love them and care for them. You are a pure soul. One that Konoha does not deserve, and because of this I will give you a power. A power? Naruto asked. This was far too much for him to take in. She nodded. Before she said anything else she locked her lips to Naruto's and the blonde felt the blood flowing into his mind. His brain was unable to comprehend it. It was filled with passions and warmth. It was amazing. When their lips parted, Naruto could feel his eyes changing, reforming. It wasn't painful nor was it comfortable, but Kami just smiled. You now carry the Omnigan with these eyes. You are a god. You control chakra and you will have an infinite amount. Your powers were the same yet greater than the Rinnegan, Sharingan and Byakugan. You will have all their benefits with none of their disadvantages. Also every creature that I have made shall do you bidding, and when you reach of age, you will be husband, but I am understandable you can have many wives but I must come first, Kami replied, making the boy blush. Marriage? Naruto thought in his mind, not only was he made a god but now he was going to marry Kami? Kami giggled again. Be safe and stay strong. Learn your power and meet your tenant. Don't worry, Kurama isn't a bad guy once you get to know him. Kurama? Before he could get an answer, Kami put her hand onto his forehead before he was dragged to the recesses of his mind. 8 years later. Naruto, age 12. Who are you? Yelled a Kumo nin as he jumped down and stared into the eyes of a man rumored to be god in the ninja realm. He wore a white overcoat with orange flames on the hue and sleeves. On the back of his coat was the kanji for sage, while within his coat he wore a standard Chunin flag jacket, but this one was black with a whirlpool symbol on the top left side of it. Underneath the jacket was a black long-sleeved shirt with orange lining and a chainmail undershirt. He wore a pair of cargo pants that had scrolls going down vertically on his legs with a pair of steel-toed combat boot. His face was overshadowed by a hood only revealing a small portion of his mouth, while the entirety of his upper face was pitch black except for a single strand of blonde hair jutting out. But through the darkness one could still this man's eyes as they shone with a bright intensity like none other. His eyes were pure white, the epitome of indifference, as there was 6 black spiraling lines surrounding the center that held a tomo, a single large tomo instead of a pupil where it lay as the dominant one with 6 others that lay on each line. Before the man could ask any more questions, the center tomo began expanding out before taking the shape of a saw, and he began rushing through hand signs, summoning jutsu. When his hand met the wood of the tree branch he was standing on, a giant purple snake appeared and started cackling madly at the Kumo Nen. He froze as he saw the snake's fangs opened out, and he gave no resistance as the snake devoured him whole. When its job was done, the snake turned to his summoner and asked, "Why did you call me to deal with just one person, my lord?" Manda asked the shinobi as they both stared into each other's eyes, one of indifference and the other of respect. It wasn't the snake that had the indifference look. He planned on betraying his comrades and selling out his village. Not only that, but he stole slaves for his own profit. Men like that make me sick. Knowing him in your stomach will help me sleep at night. The sage remarked as the boss snake seemed to like the answer. Who was he to question a free meal? "Yes, my lord," the snake said as he bowed his head before disappearing in a puff of smoke. "Nay, Kurama, do we have anything else to do?" Naruto asked his longtime father figure. Let's go on a killing spree. I hear Rock is a great place for one. I'm sure your father would agree." The fox remarked joyfully. "Calm your bloodlust, Kurama, don't worry, eventually a war will break out and you and I will have to fight in it," said the shinobi. Whatever. Naruto, the now dubbed Naruto, just grunted and pulled his hood back, revealing his long spiky hair and whisker marks with deep blue eyes. With closer inspection, this man was nothing short of a young boy, and on his forehead was a hite 8 with the kanji for Kyuubi on it, with a whirlpool in the background. "Oi, Naruto, let's get back before Gaara gets pissed," yelled out a feminine voice. When Naruto whipped his head to look at her, he saw that it was a young petite girl with red hair tied into a ponytail but ended off with a white tip, making it look like a foxtail. She wore a dark brown tank top that exposed her midriff along with cargo pants that ended off with steel-toed boots. She also had amber-colored eyes. "Alright, Hakiri," Naruto yelled back as he stood up. "I still don't know why you don't want to mate with her, she'd make a fine vixen." Kurama cried out. "I don't see Hakiri like that, she's a little sister to me." Naruto yelled out. "Little sister? Little sister? What part about that chest of hers makes you think she is little?" The fox retorted, and it was true, she had a pretty big cup size for her age. C or something. Naruto didn't pay much attention when she was talking about them. "Well, yeah, sometimes I wonder if you're even straight," Kurama said with a sigh. "I'll go back to sleep, yaw, fuzzball." Naruto shook his head free of the mental link between him and the fox before giving a salute to Hikari and disappearing into the shadows with her. In an undisclosed location, a cave. Naruto appeared next to Hikari as they looked into the dark and damp cave. "How are the others?" asked the male of the group. "Oh, they're fine. Tayuya is trying to find a reason to kill Gaara while Tamari and Kankuro are out looking for Yang," Hikari answered as the two ventured in. "What about Yugito and B?" Naruto asked. "Oh, they're still in Kumo, but they'll help when they can." "Good, those two were lucky to be born in Kumo. If not, infiltrating the place would be far harder," Naruto said as he came across the sound of an argument spewing forth. "For the last time, Tayuya, I did not steal your cookie," Gaara's monotone voice said, but annoyance could clearly be heard in the mix. "I know you took it, you fucktard. Now where is it, you 2-bit motherfucker?" Naruto snickered to himself as he heard Gaara sigh. Tayuya could be a handful at times. "Tayuya, chill, it's just a cookie," Naruto said as he and Hikari entered the room. "Just a cookie, it's my cookie." "Shithead," Tayuya replied hotly. Is she still pissed off about the hot springs prank? Naruto asked himself. Unfortunately, somebody had been listening. Maybe not. I don't even see why she was made. I mean, she wasn't even in the hot spring when the prank happened, and where the hell did she got the frying pan from? We were in the middle of a hot spring for Kami's sake, the fox replied. Yes, there was the everlasting question as to where women got those damn frying pans from. Even the almighty Kyuubi no Kitsune had spent the better part of a century trying to figure it out. Yes, that was one of life's many great mysteries, right next to why women gain freakish strength when in the presence of a pervert. Alright. Look, we're heading out to Konoha in a week's time. You can get a cookie there, and I even know a good dango restaurant there. Naruto said, which got the intended result as Tayuya grinned before disappearing with Hikari into the many catacombs in the cave. Hey, women, right, Gaara? Gaara simply rolled his eyes at his brother as he pulled out a kunai and began to sharpen it. Remind me again why we let her join us. Naruto chuckled at how blunt his friend was with her. She was an orphan and she's been through things like us. Both the boys gained a solemn look at this. True, when they first met Tayuya they just thought she was a brat that wanted to mess with them, but when they found out she was a street orphan facing the same pain and loneliness as the two Jinchurikis did, they took her in and made her a part of their family. So how's Shukaku? Naruto asked. When Naruto had first met Gaara he found out that Shukaku, the one-tailed raccoon, had been terrorizing his mind and making it nearly impossible for Gaara to sleep. So a little chat with Kyuubi and some influencing from the Omnigan, the tailed beast, just sighed and left his container to sleep. After that episode Gaara could not stop thanking Naruto after everything he did for him. What was better was that the blonde was able to get Gaara to follow him and leave the sand for the time being at least. Gaara knew his father would not be pleased, but he didn't care. He was a horrible dad. He's still grumpy but he's getting better. Our relationship isn't anything like you and Kyuubi though, Gaara replied. Naruto nodded his head in understanding. So how are you feeling? Gaara's voice was the usual, only laced with curiosity and concern. What do you mean? We're heading back to Konoha, your home village, after 8 years. The same very village that treated you like how all us Jinchuriki were treated. Are you gonna lose it? He sounded genuinely concerned but also a bit hopeful. When Gaara and Naruto met he wanted to burn Konoha down to the ground. It was one thing when Gaara found out that the assassination attempt against him alongside the story of his mother not loving him turning out false left a dent in him, but when he found out about Naruto's life, how his father and mother gave their lives for him and asked he be seen as a hero only for them to squander the fourth, the legendary shinobi's name. It was sick. The villagers in Sand only stood away for fear that Gaara might lose it, which was understandable since he had no control over Shukaku and the seal wasn't as strong as Naruto's own, but because of that Gaara was angry. People just left him alone, whereas in Naruto's condition he was beaten and scarred. This left a boiling pot deep in his stomach, where Gaara left a personal spot for what the Konoha villagers did to his brother. No Gaara, I've put those feelings aside. The villagers only acted out in fear. It was understandable how they treated me but not excusable, the blonde replied. You're too forgiving for your own good, replied Gaara while shaking his head. The blonde just grinned before he pushed himself up from the wall he was leaning up against and made his way out the cave. Get everyone ready, we're heading out once the sun sets, Naruto ordered as he walked out. Gaara gave a nod as a response before he left to go tell Tayuya and Hakiri. As Naruto walked out he began to think about Konoha. I wonder if anybody recognizes me? Naruto pondered. I'd think it'd be better if they don't recognize you, kid, Kurama said, his voice in a low growl at Konoha. It's just another stinkhole. I guess you're right, Naruto thought sadly. He may have been born in Konoha but the village just wasn't home, not anymore at least. You should practice going into sage mode, that would make you feel better, Kurama added. Yeah, you're right. After the talk with Kurama, Naruto made his way up into a tree where he closed his eyes and let the nature energy enter his body. It was a weird feeling really, with using Kurama's power. All he felt was rage, raw and powerful rage, but with sage mode it was calm, serene. Opening his eyes Naruto sped through hand signs and slammed his palm onto the ground before a giant toad appeared and the blonde sat carelessly on his head. Naruto, why did you summon me? Gamabunta roared. He didn't like being called for nothing. Hey Gamabunta, what was my dad like? Naruto asked. The great toad boss just sighed. When Naruto found out his father was the fourth and he was his personal summon, the blonde often asked him these questions. Honestly he didn't mind. He always liked Minato, but the boy would be driven insane if he continued to talk about him like this. Naruto, as I've said and as you've probably heard, Minato was a great man, loyal and strong, but why are you asking me? This honestly made the toad boss curious. Naruto usually summoned him in the morning. I'm going back to Konoha, Naruto answered. Hearing a hum from Gamabunta, Naruto sighed. Do you think it's a good idea? The blonde asked. To be honest Naruto, I don't know. One side of me is torn to burn it down to the ground because of what they did to Minato, but another side is because Konoha is Minato's village and by destroying it I would further trample his good name. Naruto nodded his head in understanding. Thanks Gamabunta. The toad boss just grunted before disappearing in a poof. Landing gracefully onto the forest floor, Naruto began stretching. With a sight he released sage mode and activated his Omnigan. The center tomo expanded for a moment before 4 lines began protruding out and ended after touching the first spiraling line. After a version of Susanoo formed behind Naruto, this Susanoo was greatly different from Itachi Uchiha's Susanoo. This one was formed through the use of the Omnigan. Instead of the usual black-colored demonic soldier, this one was pure white and wasn't a skeleton. Instead it was an angel. She had long flowing white hair and wore a long form-fitting white dress that went past her feet. She had two long and white wings that surrounded Naruto's sides protecting him. On one hand she carried a long broadsword while in the other she carried a shield with the symbol of a raven's claw on it. Pleased with the result, Naruto let the attack die down before walking back to the cave. The next day, Naruto, Hikari and Gaara stood together in the front of the group. Hikari was in between Naruto and Gaara and she had changed clothes. She now wore a red kimono-like top while wearing a white sash-like belt that was done in a bow tie on her back. Her hair was the same except it looked like it was redder. She wore tight form-fitting shorts with knee-length dark purple boots that exposed her toes. On her waist was a pendant that was much like the whirlpool symbol from Naruto's clan, except this one was amber green and it had a shuriken in the center. Temari, Kankuro and Tayuya were in the back. The two girls were talking animatedly while Kankuro just sighed. Being with girls was always a good thing, but being with a foul mouth and his sister was not. When the group first met Tayuya, she was very rude and didn't trust them, but after a while she warmed up to them, or at least Naruto and Temari. She was still dealing with trust issues with Gaara and Kankuro when she caught the two of them peeping on her. To be fair, it was Kankuro who was spying and Gaara who was trying to stop him. But that wasn't how she saw when produced a frying pan out of nowhere. When they reached the gates they were greeted to the sight of Izumo and Kotetsu. Before any one of them could say anything, Naruto placed them into a genjutsu-induced sleep and the two continued their walk undeterred. The reason why they were there was that one of Naruto's informants was there for the Chunin exams. A ninja from Grass if he wasn't mistaken. Naruto walked up to the academy, his school now only a place where bad memories reside. The rest had split off to what they wanted while Naruto just continued to stare at it. All the while listening intently to the footsteps coming to his side. "Sage," the man next to him said in a whisper. "Suzuki," Naruto replied. "What do you have for me?" Suzuki pulled out a file from his person and handed it to Naruto. "Something big is going on, Sage, and I don't know what, but I know it has something to do with the Jinchuriki." Naruto, or Sage, just nodded his head and disappeared without a sound. Suzuki just sighed before he made his way into the academy. No use making his team wait for him. Naruto's eyes began scanning the area around him. The ninja in the village must be very relaxed because Naruto could only see and sense Chunin-level chakra reserves from every ninja, even Anbu. This was disappointing. Naruto then swung around and looked down onto a man who was literally pissing himself. Behind the man was Gaara and Kankuro while the girls were out shopping or something. This man was a very important man because this man was a civilian council member who was in league with Orochimaru, and Naruto needed the information regarding Orochimaru that instant. "Please, I'll tell you anything you want," the man pleaded. Naruto nodded his head as he placed his hand on the man's head. "Oh, I know you will." At that moment in time an unbelievable amount of pain shot through him and he couldn't even scream thanks to Gaara's sand in his mouth. Naruto was concentrating and it was best not to disturb him. What he was doing was really simple. He was sending quick bursts of chakra into the man's body and said chakra were swarming his brain, more accurately the part of the brain that retained memory. The chakra began scooping up the required memories and starts sending them to Naruto's brain, where he began filling them and sorting them away. Usually Naruto would use the Rinnegan properties in his eyes to deal with the interrogating, but that would result in the man's death, and because of his profession that would lead to too much suspicion, so this would have to suffice. When he was finally done, Naruto let go of the man's head where he slumped to the ground. He wasn't dead, just unconscious. He might have slight amnesia, but Naruto placed a genjutsu on him to make him think he was drunk and was dropped off here by thugs because he insulted them. After the job was done, he and the two males disappeared without a trace. The next day, enough, the Hokage bellowed as he stared at the civilian council, a small amount of killing intent leaking off from him. Sarutobi Hiruzen hated many things, but what he hated the most were bratty civilians going on and on about their precious Uchiha. "If it wasn't for the promise I made you, Itachi, Sasuke would be dead already for all the trouble he's caused me," Sarutobi thought into his mind as he stared into the eyes of every civilian as they began to choke from the killing intent. Let us begin the discussion about the Chunin exams, Sarutobi said, getting nods from the shinobi side while the civilians were mumbling to themselves. The Sandame felt the comings of a headache as the meeting would progress. Kaharu stood up and spoke with an air of finality. I decree that Jiraiya is to train the Uchiha and teach all his jutsus, even the famed Rasengan used by our hero the fourth. The civilians nodded at this, and the shinobi in the room, minus Sarutobi's former teammates, began scowling. Denied. Jiraiya will choose his own apprentice, and the right to that ranked jutsu is held by none except for those with Namikaze blood. Sarutobi was fuming on the inside. He can expect this behavior from the civilians, but from his former teammates. Oh, how they have fallen. Kaharu scowled while Homura remained impassive. Danzo, however, remained an unnerving silent. The old warhawk was lost in thought about the latest reports his root had given him. He had been so adamant about that one thing that continued to be squandered in the village, and after he disappeared, Danzo had been searching for him non-stop, but it seems luck was on his side. If that boy is here, then making him into a weapon would be easy, he thought. Little did he know he was going to get a surprise. In the Konoha market district, Kiba, Hinata and Shino were walking through the market. They had just finished training and were now looking for food when Hinata caught sight of a peculiar sight. In an old ramen stand there was a man wearing a white coat with the kanji for sage on his back while scarfing down on the famed noodles in Fire Country, and by the looks of the 20 bowls stacked next to him, he ate a lot of it. Hinata wanted to sweat drop, but she was too shy to do that and instead just flinched and walked away, but Shino and Kiba looked at the guy oddly, having never seen someone like that before was sure something to see. While that was happening, Naruto was busy scarfing down on the beautiful mistress known as ramen. However, Kami, his wife-to-be, would always be glorious. This food was the greatest of all. Ayame and Tucci stood slack-jawed at his impressive eating habit. They had only seen one other person eat that much. Before they could say anything, the hooded figure that was seating on their counter eating ramen disappeared, leaving behind a hefty sum of ryo on the table. Ayame's jaw dropped to the ground at the sight of the amount of money. Look at the amount of clothes I can buy with that, she thought. Tucci, however, was having none of it and quickly scooped up the money before she could even touch them. Back with Naruto. Nay, why'd you take me away? I was eating. Naruto yelled, furious. His ramen time was cut down. Naruto turned his head to see another member of his little group. This member was young. Her hair was a frilly blonde and she wore a dark brown leather jacket with a white blouse underneath and a skirt that ended at her midcalf from the front, while in the back it continued to just above her knees. On her waist was a katana and on her back was a sword christened the Dragon Blade, but there wasn't anything special about it except for a hilt. It had a dragon's head. Naruto, don't you know it's not healthy to just eat ramen, right? She asked with a stern face, which was strange seeing it on a girl at least 1 or 2 years younger. Naruto. Nay, young, where'd you been? Tamari and Kankuro have been looking everywhere for you. Oh, I spotted some slavers and thought I should pay them a visit, she said with a wicked smile, making Naruto shiver. The blonde bowed his head in respect to the slavers, though he hated slavery with a vengeance, knowing that those poor souls who had to face Yang's wrath would be far worse from anything he would do. All right, let's go, the blonde said as he began dashing off across the rooftops. It didn't take long till they reached the rest of the group. Tayuya and Tamari were talking animatedly, and by seeing them, Yang quickly made her way to them. Hikari was talking with Gaara while Kankuro was looking into a girl's window using a high-powered binoculars. Naruto smirked seeing the male sand sibling. Kankuro, what poor girl are you spying on now? Some blonde girl. A Yamanaka, I believe, Kankuro said with a perverted grin. Damn, if she had paid more attention to her training maybe she might have spotted you already, Naruto said with a grin. Hey, makes my life easier, Kankuro said with a perverted chuckle, only to get bonked on the head with a frying pan by Tayuya. Arrow baka. Naruto could barely keep his laughing in at his friend's misfortune, but soon enough he had to get serious. The Chunin exams were happening soon, and if his sources were right, Orochimaru would be there to get his precious Uchiha, and when that happens he'd have to stop him and maybe work on the Uchiha's common sense a bit. But that would be a secondary objective. Alright guys, let's go. Watch each other's backs, Naruto stated, and the group nodded their heads before disappearing. With Naruto, the blonde was racing through the woods at high speed and landed next to a camp in the woods. Very devious. Sand and Sound had placed camps all around the Leaf Village, and all of them were concealed in underground bunkers or caves, and even if any patrols spotted them, there were genjutsu users waiting to pounce on them and erase their memories. Naruto, be careful. Genjutsu may not affect you, but they will still dampen your abilities, the fox warned, getting a nod from the young sage. Closing his eyes, Naruto activated his dojutsu that showed the chakra signatures of everyone in his line of sight. 1, 2, 3.25. This should be easy, thought the blonde as he dropped onto the ground. He landed with a crouch, barely making any noise before speeding forward. His grace and movements were simply a breeze in the air. Silent, not a single sound was made. He stopped behind a ninja and began running through hand signs before whispering, "Heavenly Grasp." And just like that, Naruto's eyes sent a spike of chakra into the man's body and began disrupting the flow before it reached the center of its well and burned it all out. The ninja died without even knowing how. Naruto smiled as he walked off and met another ninja, Sand. He didn't need to die. In this situation they were victims. Gaara would agree. He walked forward and tapped his shoulder, making the guard spun around and stare into his eyes before he was knocked out by a single whisper, "Tsukuyomi." The man was dragged into Naruto's genjutsu world where he was knocked out. Before he could touch the ground, the blonde grabbed him and pulled him away. He continued on his crouch walk and came across about 10 different men standing outside the entrance to the bunker surrounding a fire. All sound except for 2 who are Sand, Naruto thought as he began analyzing the situation. He would go the sneaky way, but going all out and putting the fear of God into Orochimaru was too tempting, and technically Naruto was a god, just got to get hitched first. Naruto smiled as he exposed himself to the ninjas. All of them began scattering the moment he stepped out. A few tried to run away and call for help, but he stopped them using a mud barrier. Not that it mattered since everybody else were dealing with the other camps. "Well, this is going to be fun. Well, for me anyways," Naruto said nonchalantly as he pulled out a katana from seemingly nowhere. Ahem. Seals. Ahem, and took up a stance. The group of sound ninjas started to gain scowls and pulled out their kunai, overconfidence written on their stances. However, the sand nin seemed to be hesitant. It seemed they know when they were outmatched. Naruto smirked. 3 sound nins jumped forward trying to get a hit on the cloaked figure that stood before them, but ultimately hit nothing but a log before the same figure dropped from behind them and in one smooth motion bisected 2, while the third got nicked in the arm. That leaves 7 with 1 that was wounded. Naruto took up a ready stance as another sound nin jumped forward. Naruto's katana met the nin's kunai in clash of sparks before he took up a stance reminiscent to that of Jukin, only it involved a blade and not his hands. 100 Gates of Hell. Naruto yelled out as his hands moved in a blur. The ninjas couldn't even see where his blade was hitting except for the familiar sound of metal hitting flesh. When the strikes ended, Naruto placed his katana into his sheath that was revealed to be on his waist, leaving the blade only inches out with his thumb before he slammed the blade completely in and making a thump noise. As if on cue, the sound nin that was attacked started to gain slash marks on his clothes and body before fire burst out of the wounds, incinerating the man before he could even scream. The surviving ninjas all began sweating at this sight. Their opponent was very strong and they knew they wouldn't survive, but if they were to die they would die with honor. The sound nin from before who got nicked in the arm jumped forward and in a downward slash tried to impale Naruto's head, only for him to sidestep it and push the hilt of his blade into the ninja's gut before pulling out his own kunai and ramming it through the poor pawn's neck and ripping it out. Before the lifeless corpse touched the body, Naruto jumped forward and met another sound nin with a deadly dance of blades before Naruto jumped away from him and attacked a surprised nin, slicing his head in half before returning and attacking his previous opponent. 5. The sound nin sent a plea to his allies and altogether the ninjas jumped forward. Naruto had to be careful, he couldn't risk harming the sand nin. So he pulled back and rushed through hand signs, wind release, great breakthrough. The wall of pressurized air slammed into the sand nin, launching them far away from the fight and leaving the 3 sound nin for Naruto. The sage dashed forward and rammed his blade into one of the sound nin's gut before he sliced his way through his dead corpse and towards the others. The 2 ninjas regained their composure and met the blade with their kunai, only for Naruto to let go it and take out his own kunai. He rammed it into the closest ninja before kicking the corpse into the other, making him lose balance, which is a very fatal thing. Naruto rushed through hand signs as the center tomo of his eyes began expanding into a saw blade, and out came a white flame of Amaterasu that burned away the ninja before he could even scream. With the sound nin done, Naruto dashed off to go deal with the sand nin. With Yang and Tayuya, "Hey, who are yo aishk?" a sound nin yelled as he was impaled by Yang's blade. "Pathetic," she spat before twirling and impaling another nin. Tayuya was off on a tree using her flute to make the sound ninjas fight each other. The looks on their faces when they were being attacked by their own comrades were priceless. The redhead snorted happily as her kill count began to rise. The blonde girl saw this and smiled. Tayuya was the only one who could match her battle-crazed mind. "Hey blondie, I spotted a hottie not far from you," Tayuya yelled at her. True to her word, a big muscle-toned man appeared wielding a large blade and was staring at Yang with what appeared to be lust, but that was what all Yang saw on men's faces. She felt bile rise in her throat as a look of disgust made it to her face. She turned to Tayuya and cried out her thanks. The redhead acknowledged her with a nod before the blonde turned back to her opponent. He was readying himself in stance. This one was a brute as far as Yang could tell. He would be a worthy opponent. She dropped down into her stance and the two dashed forward and met with a resounding clang, eliciting sparks to fly as they stared into each other's eyes. It stayed that way for a while, before the two disengaged and began circling each other. A brief moment of praise flashed through the man's eyes. This young lady's figure betrays her strength. Not many could hold up against him in a duel of power, and this little girl seemed to be the first to be evenly matched with him. Just by that, he knew she would be a hard person to kill. He dashed forward while she remained completely still till at the last second she sheathed her katana and pulled out her dragon blade, where the two blades met with sparks. The man smirked. "Do you really think that by just changing sword you'll win?" The man grunted, overconfidence lacing his voice. Yang all but smirked. Perhaps he wouldn't be a worthy opponent. She sent a wave of her chakra into the blade and the eyes of the dragon head glowed before fire shot out and engulfed the blade. The man could feel the intense heat slowly burning his skin, and he watched with horror as the metal of his blade began to melt. Yang smirked as she rammed her shoulder into the man's gut and stood victorious above him. The man could only look in fear as she placed the tip of her blade above his family jewels before an evil smile took residence on her face. "Please, no," he begged, but it only seemed to encourage her further as she let the blade fall. With the Sand Siblings. Mass burial. Gaara intoned as his sand engulfed a group of sound ninjas before crushing them into tiny little pieces. In that very moment the two males felt a shiver run up their spines. Making them open for 3 sound ninjas and a sand nin to exploit, but Tamari sent a wave of wind that sent them back into the ground, knocking them out. "What's wrong?" Tamari asked, her brother's worry evident in her eyes. "I think Yang has found a worthy opponent," Gaara intoned, "but if you listen closely you'll find pity there." Kankuro only shivered in response. Back with Naruto. Sound release. Blisters. A wave of sound began ringing through the walls of the bunker. "Did you really think this would affect me?" Naruto asked. In a way it was affecting him, but the blisters that were being formed were quickly being healed before blood could burst from them. "You owe me something for this," Kurama said as he began working in overdrive. Yay, I'll go imagine up a vixen for you or something." The blonde sage pulled out his katana from his waist and raced forward, driving the blade into the man's heart before jumping away and slashing against his enemies. Naruto was skilled, and he wasn't sadistic. Something the sound nins don't have. Some may say being sadistic helps you be a better ninja, but that's only true in a small way. It'd make you more deadly, but the amount of mistakes you'll make just to quell your bloodlust would end only in your death. Naruto ducked underneath a kunai before lashing out with his shuriken and embedding an enemy into a wall. Before the sound nin could react, he was staring at white soulless eyes as the center tomo began expanding and forming a saw blade right before he felt his soul being ripped apart and taken into Naruto's own. "So Orochimaru knew I'd be coming, eh?" Naruto mused. Through the memories of the cannon fodder he ripped apart, Naruto found out that the snake Sani knew that he was being hunted down but thought nothing of it and instead believed that his men could deal with it before the invasion, but it seems he was dead wrong. The pedophile always was overconfident in his abilities. Naruto continued to walk down the hallways, swiping the blood of his blade before sheathing it again. He stopped himself when he reached a door, big red double doors. How subtle, he thought before he placed his finger on the door, and using the motion of a simple love tap, the door burst open and collided into the ground with a smash, sending dust and pieces of concrete everywhere. Ah, so the great and powerful sage has paid me a visit. Kukukukuku. The deranged Sannin cackled as the blonde stood in his position. The blonde could feel the chakra Orochimaru was pulsing, thinking as if such a small and insignificant power could match up to his. You know about something I want, Naruto intoned. Oh, and what, might I ask, is that? The pale man was smiling evilly, a certain gleam in his eyes when he saw the Dujutsu eyes that were shining in the man's eye sockets. There had been many tales that came from this so-called sage, most of which were about his eyes. Such a powerful Dujutsu, if Orochimaru were to come into possession of such eyes, immortality would be an arm's reach away. The location and members of the criminal organization Akatsuki, the sage replied before shimmering out of existence and reappearing behind the Sannin, his blade out and against his neck. I'm asking nicely here. You don't want to see me ask any other way? His voice was cold and dead, and the Sannin had to suppress a shudder as the cold metal of his weapon pricked his skin, letting blood flow. Acting quickly, Orochimaru performed a sealless substitution jutsu and pulled out his blade, the Kusanagi, and prepared himself for a battle. Sigh. And here I thought you were supposed to be smart. Naruto dashed forward using only a tenth of his normal speed and met up with Orochimaru with a sideward slash that was intercepted by the Kusanagi. The snake Sannin pushed away from his adversary before performing hand seals, many hidden shadow snake hands. A plethora of snake burst from his sleeves and slithered their way to the sage, only for half their number to vanish in a poof of smoke. What? The snake man was shocked at this. Is this the power of his eyes? Meanwhile, Naruto just smirked. The technique he used made it so he summoned snakes to do his bidding, but there was a catch. Unlike a usual summoning, these are directly attached to the summoner and uses his chakra to be able to appear, which is why they appear from his hands. By using his ability and cutting of the chakra from reaching the snakes, these snakes will then disappear because of the severed connection, but Naruto was only capable to do a handful, but still, it made work easier for him. Pushing wind chakra into a pair of shuriken, he whispered, "Vacuum blade," sending the shuriken out and transforming them into widespread, lethal fan blades that cut down the snakes before ultimately stopping by a swipe from Kusanagi. Naruto and Orochimaru kept a stare-down going on. Wind release, great breakthrough. A wall of pressurized air slammed into Naruto, but the sage had pumped chakra into his legs, gluing him into position. My turn. Fire release. Fire Phoenix Sage Fire Technique. A volley of flames were sent to Orochimaru, and the Sannin was forced to be on guard to dodge all of them. But his eyes widened when nearly half of the flames he dodged disappeared to reveal shuriken in them. He was lucky to have dodged half of them, but a good number of shuriken embedded itself onto his arms. Yield, the sage yelled. Never. Orochimaru yelled defiantly as he raced through a number of hand seals before slamming his palm onto the ground. Out from underneath it came a giant purple snake. Manda, Naruto smiled, he just signed his own death warrant. Manda, kill him. Orochimaru commanded, but grew shocked as the giant snake just stared at his opponent and then bowed to him. What, my lord? The snake said, his head still low. This on its own made Orochimaru fear the man that stood before him even more. Manda was known for his extreme pride, and for him to bow his head down to anyone would prove his strength. Even Orochimaru had problems when dealing with him. Hello Manda, can you help me deal with Orochimaru? Naruto asked the snake. He was however inwardly laughing at the amount of sweat that was rolling off of Orochimaru's forehead. Yes, my lord. Without another word, Manda threw his head upwards, launching the Sannin into the air before he crushed his summoner in a belly flop. After Manda disappeared in a puff of smoke, Naruto had to hold his sides at the sight of the squashed S-rank criminal before him. Oh, this is too good. Naruto made his way down onto the small crater of Orochimaru's defeat and looked into his eyes. The Sannin said nothing as he stared into the eyes of the sage as the center tomo expanded and took the form of a saw blade. Before succumbing to darkness, Naruto grimaced. There was practically no real information inside Orochimaru's head other than how to be a pedophile and escape the prying eyes of the Anbu, and since Naruto already knew the latter and didn't want to know the other, he was given nothing of real importance. He turned away and began walking, only to be stopped by a rustling of gravel and dirt. Out from the shadows came his little group and as well as Hikari, who tossed a file to Naruto. I infiltrated the Hokage's office and found nothing we didn't already know, but I checked up on the civilian homes and came out with several of them having papers of recruiting assassins to hunt you down. If you look through the papers you'll find the names of the 5 past assassins that we killed chasing you this month, she reported. Naruto hummed to himself. So that's where they came from, he mused before flipping through the papers and frowned when he read some of the names. The Blood Red Huntress? That name piqued Naruto's interest as he had never heard that name. An assassin he has no information of? That was dangerous. Naruto gave a curt nod before all of them disappeared out of sight. The very next day, the Hokage sat peacefully on his desk, or perhaps none too little. He looked around his room and his gaze dropped onto Homura and Koharu, his former teammates and bane of his existence. Off to his side was Danzo, who, since they had been friends for quite a while, could tell he was inwardly seething. As to why? He knew not of why, but he knows anything that made Danzo made either involved his route, which he knew was still operational, or the livelihood of Konoha. Both weren't really ideal. Explain to me again why you are here. Sarutobi groaned out, and he would have sworn he saw the ghost of a smile flash on Danzo's face at his expense. Koharu huffed before speaking as if her position were even greater than the Hokage. The Uchiha needs to get stronger, he is weak. Hitaki's teachings is not enough. I suggest we place him under the teaching of an Anbu operative. Sarutobi bristled at that. The Anbu had better things to do than to deal with the arrogant Uchiha. If he sicked Yugao on the Uchiha, he wouldn't even last a day, let alone an hour. No, the idea would probably end in the civilian section asking for Yugo's head for doing what they asked of her. He will not condemn one of his own to deal with a civilian. No, that would be a fate far too cruel from hell. No, Koharu, the Anbu have more pressing matters to tend to than to teach the Uchiha. The Sandame said with a tired sigh, slightly irritated that they seemed to be forgetting who was the leader of the village. The old woman's face scrunched up in anger before she began doing the passive-aggressive, political way of, well, bitching. Danzo, however, paid no heed to the woman or his former friend as his mind began to work overdrive. His route had seen the fight Naruto and his band of, what he can only assume, mercenaries beat down a massive contingent of Sound and Sand Nin yesterday, and he was seething on how his route failed to have come anywhere near such a threat to Konoha and the fact that the Jinchuriki seemed to be far too powerful for him to manipulate so easily. Nevertheless, he had sent out a capture team to bring him in. Had he known the Jinchuriki was actually the hooded man known as Sage, whose eyes were rumored to rival the Rinnegan, he would have just killed the boy the moment the report landed on his desk and took his eyes out. To have such power, he would be unrivaled. He had to suppress a chuckle that was escaping his lips as he feigned himself being interested in the conversation, which was again talking about the arrogant Uchiha. There are few things he would agree with Sarutobi, but this was a matter that the two acknowledged in their younger years. The Sharingan was a cheater's way of becoming strong. But he smiled briefly as he rubbed his hand absent-mindedly on his bandaged arm. But shinobi don't play fair after all. With Naruto, the blonde sage was currently passing off the remaining amount of time he had in Konoha simply walking around catching the sights. He could briefly recall faces of people he once considered friends when he passed by their homes. Sakura, the banshee of a crush he had, though she wasn't that pretty, she was the only one who would even acknowledge his presence, making him crave simply for the attention. Sasuke, the Teme who was arrogant and cocky, but even through it the two had a rivalry of power and brotherhood as camaraderie was established even before the academy days and their meeting in the circumstances of his family's death. Something that seemed to shatter Naruto, as he could understand Sasuke feelings to an extent as he never really grew up with a family, but if he were to lose Gaara or Tayuya or anybody in his group, whom had become family to him, he'd be devastated. No, he'd go batshit insane trying to hunt down the person who did it. Naruto smiled inwardly as he saw a bunch of kids playing in front of the academy ground and the lone swing in front of it where he would spend his days being excommunicated from everyone else. Feeling a brief bout of nostalgia, Naruto sat down on the swing as he used to before, looking at the school longingly. I wonder how Iruka-sensei is. Naruto mused. Even though Naruto was young at the time, he could see it in his teacher's eyes, the only eyes that have ever really accepted him. There wasn't anger and disdain in those eyes, instead worry and care that only an older brother would hold. But his thoughts were cut short when he felt something press on his back. He lifted his head slightly to see Hikari leaning against him, her arms around his waist and her face nuzzled in the crook of his neck. "Bad memories?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. "Yay," Naruto answered in an even tone, refusing to seem weak in the eyes of, he considered, his charge. Hikari was young when he met her, one of the first he accepted into this little group. It was a year after he left Konoha. He found her when visiting a village and the two played for a while, but later he father ushered her back home. Naruto didn't know at the time, but when she arrived she was greeted to another boy whom she was supposed to marry. This boy was arrogant, cocky and rude, a huge contrast to the company she had moments ago. At that night she stood crying at having to marry a boy she didn't want to marry, catching the attention of Naruto, who had stopped by to return her a pendant she dropped when she left the area they were playing at. She told him what happened and Naruto went all out on her parents. That night he learned a lot of secrets about her clan. Secrets he refused to tell Hikari and even to believe them true, but because of those secrets he took Hikari in, even though only being a year older than her, and left the clan house a smoldering mess to quell his anger. The young redhead had always been a little sister to Naruto, and after he told her about the fox she remained completely impassive about it, stating that if the Kyuubi was sealed in Naruto that would mean Naruto was the jailer and not the jailed. The blonde smiled at that memory. Hikari, noticing it, raised her eyebrows but didn't press. "You know we could burn Konoha down to the ground," Hikari suggested, but there was no humor in her voice. Naruto sighed at that point. Nearly everybody in their group wanted Konoha a piece of ash, all of which connected to Naruto. They would often say that his feelings were their feelings and what they did to him was what they did to all of them, and all agreed to burn the village. But the blonde sage could no such thing, too many innocent, Naruto thought. "That's not gonna happen," Naruto said as he listened intently to the sounds of wolves howling into the night and crickets chirping. Hikari nodded her head against his back but kept close to him. She would gladly admit it, alongside the other females, that Naruto was literally a personal heater for all of them. The amount of body warmth he produced was staggering, and it helped during the chilly seasons. Plus the fact that he honestly didn't mind being hugged by any one of them made things far more easier. "Come on, it's getting late, we should get home," Naruto said as he raised himself of the swing but had to suppress a chuckle when Hikari simply clung to him tighter, forcing him to give her a piggyback. He was about to say something when he felt a tingling feeling going down on him. It was the same tingling feeling when he was attacked by a genjutsu, he thought with wide eyes before turning and gently sliding a genjutsu-induced, sleeping Hikari off his back and pulled out the kunai as he scanned the tree area, his ocular abilities rendered useless for the moment. Genjutsu was an art Naruto thoroughly hated, not just because it was impossible for him to set up, without his eyes of course, but when one was casted on him he could barely see using his eyes. Simply because genjutsu was the art of placing a person in an illusion by practically putting him in a veil of chakra that would affect the area around him. Normally it would mean nothing because of the Kyuubi and his eyes, but a particularly strong genjutsu, which was one that was usually put on him, would take a while to break out of, but he wouldn't still be affected because his eyes are capable of bypassing a genjutsu entirely. But the only problem is the chakra veil surrounding, which practical blinds him from seeing any other chakra source outside said veil, making his ocular abilities impossible since he was incapable of seeing the flow of chakra in his opponent to control it. Chakra is like a raging fire, it cannot be tamed, and when it is very unpredictable and difficult. Because of this, Naruto needed to see the chakra in order to perfectly control it, to either stop the flow completely, which uses an awful lot of concentration mind you, or simply use the chakra against his opponent. But thanks to the chakra veil, Naruto has to resort to using his regular eyes, a pair of cerulean eyes he hadn't used in a long time, again. So without further hesitation Naruto deactivated his Dujutsu eyes and continued to scan. But he was literally pissed when he felt another genjutsu being placed on him. Seriously. He seethed as he thought of the thrashing he was about to bestow on his enemy. Out of the trees 4 men dressed strangely, wearing plain white masks, appeared and ripped out their ninjatus off their backs. "So you escaped the genjutsu, eh?" "Rather quickly, I would say," one of the ninjas said. Naruto knew these people, rude operatives, victims under the command of Danzo, so he was hesitant in fighting them but knew their minds were too far gone to be saved. Without further ado Naruto jumped forward and kunai clashed against ninjutsu as the two dueled, only to have it interrupted when another raced forward to grab him. Reacting quickly, Naruto dropped to the ground and raced through hand signs before calling out one of the many, non-ocular techniques he had. Wind Release. Wind Dragon Jutsu. The dragon made of pure air sailed and impacted into the root ninja's body before Naruto unleashed his full speed and rocketed away from his opponent in a sonic boom. Caught surprised by the move, the root operative had to fight down the urge to cup his bleeding ears from the sound that accompanied their adversary's impressive speed. Before anyone noticed, a faint afterimage of pure blonde passed by the group before it disappeared alongside two of their allies. What the? He couldn't finish his sentence as the one who had been hit with the wind dragon disappeared as well. The root operative made a single step back out of fear before an image shimmered into existence before him, white soulless eyes staring into him with the center tomo taking the shape of three interconnected scythes spinning furiously at him. Penance stare was the last thing he heard before out from the eyes. Only one word could explain it: hell appeared. Bright glowing flames burst from his eyes and burned into his own. Images of people burning and suffering, a world of fire and demons plaguing his thoughts. He was forever trapped in this world as he dropped dead on the ground. His eyes burnt into stone. Naruto cupped his eyes in his hands. That technique exhausted him mentally as he needed to think up of the world he wanted to forever entrap the man who ruined a peaceful moment in. So he used what he would describe as hell and simply just left him there for the rest of his life. The blonde turned around and picked up his charge and walked away, not caring about the root body that was strewn on the ground or his comrades that were laid out in the area, in various compromising positions and areas. He was pretty sure he dropped one of them in the women's changing room at the hot springs. That one was probably gonna have a fun time. Sigh, and here I thought Konoha would get better, he muttered before he disappeared with a sonic boom and reappeared in front of a hotel. He entered it and gave a nod to the receptionist who nodded back before discreetly doing hand seals underneath the desk, activating privacy seals. Naruto would very proudly admit of his spy network and loyal soldiers under his commands. However, it was harder to get some into Konoha considering some of the people's grudge against him, but he was capable of sneaking in some of his more well-trained soldiers who later took up jobs and became part of the civilian population. The hotel housing one of his many operatives stationed in Konoha. After the hotel was perfectly secured, Naruto entered a single room at the top of the hotel which held the entire group, minus him and Hikari of course. What happened? Tamari asked in worry as she gently lifted Hikari off Naruto's back. Some of Danzo's root attacked us just now, Naruto grunted out as he began nursing a rather sizable cut on his arms. One of the root operatives got a lucky hit when he was dragging them away. Let me see that, Yang said softly as she performed a medical jutsu on Naruto's arm. It wouldn't really matter because of Kyuubi, but the fox would sometimes leave wounds as they are reasoning that it was experience for pain tolerance, which actually did make sense. Ever since Kurama stopped healing some of the nastier wounds, Naruto learned to grow a pain tolerance and could probably survive at least a half hour of interrogation against Ibiki Morino, and that's saying something. It's not that bad really, Naruto tried to reassure her when he saw the worried look on her face. Not that bad, they were inches from hitting an artery. She retorted heatedly as green chakra began forming on her palms. The blonde resigned himself to his fate as he awaited for the jutsu to finish. You know, we should probably deal with Danzo and his root, Gaara suggested. If anything, it'll make things easier for us in the future with our plans of stopping the Akatsuki, Tamari added. Naruto just sighed. In truth, he had planned with dealing with Root, but not so soon. He had planned in using Danzo to find Tobi, the alleged Madara, as his wife, Kami told him. Oh yes, every once in a while Kami would come down and talk to Naruto, though she'd wear the skimpiest of outfits to tease Naruto and talk about stuff with him. But Naruto had plenty of other ways to find out about Tobi, but he couldn't ask his wife about it. Her reasoning being, if you are to be a god, you need to act like one and do things on your own. The blonde nodded his head in understanding. His idea to use Danzo was now useless as Danzo now will probably know he is the alleged sage, the ninja god. The traitorous man would probably be able to piece everything together somehow. There were just too many variables to leave the man alive. Nodding his head, Naruto turned to Gaara and Kankuro. You guys get prepared. Most likely we'd be in for a fight for our lives. It won't be like the Sand and Sound. These guys are trained to deal with guys like us. Nodding their head. The two brothers left to prepare while Naruto turned to the females. They all exchanged knowing looks before looking at Naruto, fire burning in their eyes. To his credit, he didn't flinch. "We're going with you," the girls stated in one, except Hikari, who was still asleep. "No," his voice boomed, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. "You girls may have proven competent against the sand and sound troops, but they were mere cannon fodder. These are trained assassins that put even the Hokage's stem in shame. You are inexperienced and ill-prepared." Naruto looked at Tayuya. "You may be skilled in genjutsu, but in your physical area you are merely genin material, making you useless for the close quarters fighting." The redhead visibly cringed when Naruto's blue eyes that once held warmth were not ice-cold, soulless. Naruto turned to Temari. "You are no different. While your abilities with Winjutsu are among commendable levels, you are useless without your fan and again in close-quarter fighting." The blonde lowered her head, not wanting to meet his gaze. Naruto looked to Yang. "You are the only one of them who I can safely say that can last at least take on 2 root members alone." This got Yang smiling. "But you are limited to your blades. All of your techniques are close quarters, making the polar opposite of the other two. Which if you were balanced would be alright, but you're not, and I doubt root would be honorable, and fight with only blades." Yang gained a downcast expression, and when his gaze landed on Hikari, his eyes softened. "I don't need to explain Hikari. She's not physically strong and only knows a few jutsu. Most of those few being medical jutsus. She is not capable of defending herself, let alone attacking a root ninja." After stating each of their faults, Naruto started casting his gaze to each one, softening as he continued down. "Each of you are strong in your own right, but not strong enough." With that, Naruto left through the door, also going to get prepared, leaving the women to think his words through. In a secluded location, several hours after the talk, Naruto sat atop a tree trunk and stared at the underground base that laid ahead. He had changed his clothes drastically. No longer did he wear the flak jacket, but instead he wore a chest plate, complete steel and able to withstand even the strongest blade. Under that he wore a black shirt with streaks of red on the sleeves. He wore metal greaves and arm bracers alongside metal boots and shin guards. He now wore a mask. This mask was white and his eye holes, instead of being circular, was instead rectangular with red streaks going down the eye holes as if it was crying bloody tears. The eye holes held nothing but darkness in them, pitch black except for the furiously spinning eyes of Naruto's Dujutsu. By his side was Gaara, dressed in a similar armor chestplate but lacked the rest. He wore red steel-toed sandals with red pants and shirt. His gourd was still the same, except now there were several longer than average kunai strapped around the center of it. Kankuro was also no longer wearing his catsuit. Instead he wore a white flak jacket with the kanji for Puppet Master on his back and a pair of dark brown pants and shirt. On his head he wore a headband, but instead of the symbol for Suna it had the kanji of Death. On his back was his trust puppet, while around his waist were smaller puppets, dolls to be exact. These were his trump card. Behind them were a row of ninjas. Each dressed the same, all of them wearing white flak jackets with a pair of dark black pants and shirts with black sandals and the headband on their foreheads with the kanji for light. These were Naruto's troops, the carriers of his will, of a god's will. To ensure peace in the land of chaos, that is their goal, that is Naruto's goal, that is the goal of the village hidden in the light. Without further ado, he and his team of sleepers jumped off and prepared for a fight. Danzo stared impassively in front of him. What was he staring at, you may ask? Nothing. He was just looking forward, into the darkness of his tunnel, as he heard the sounds of fighting and cries of pain emanate from the darkness within. By his side was Torun and Fu, his two most loyal root operatives. He spared a glance to the others in the room. Lower-tier operatives, cannon fodder. But they were useful nonetheless as he continued to wait. The cries and sounds of metal and death continuing till they all stopped, leaving only an eerie silence that did not faze nor touch Danzo and his operatives. To them, this psychological game was some daily occurrence. Light style. Heavenly bind. Out from the darkness, ropes made out of pure, white light reached out and latched onto the first row of root operatives, keeping them held in place, unable to move or use jutsu before all of them lost their heads. But still Danzo didn't flinch, and neither did his operatives. Passing a look to Torun, the ninja nodded and began forming a ball in between his hands made entirely out of his insects before something amazing occurred. The insects stopped and began to die out one by one before the ball was gone. Surprised, he turned to look at his lord to see he was none too pleased. But he couldn't reprimand his subordinate though, because from the ceiling dropped two ninjas, both dressed like a regular shinobi, but instead they carried white flak jackets. Each of them pulled out two trench knives and began their assault. Danzo watched them with calculating eyes, and already he was ninja had made short work of his operatives using only their trench knives. Dodging and weaving around their enemies like water before attacking with quick and deadly accurate strikes that left his men either crippled or dead. Making a discreet move of his hand, a group of Rude appeared by his side, more well-equipped and better trained than the rest. They jumped forward and met the two shinobi in a clash of metal, only to drawn back by a puppet dropping from the side. Angered by the addition of another enemy, Danzo followed the chakra strings till he reached a separate tunnel in his underground base and had to hide a grimace when another group of these light shinobi appeared alongside a puppet user. Raising his hands, a separate group of his cannon fodder raced forward and met the shinobi head-on with only their tanto and kunai. "Where's Tsukikage-sama?" one of the shinobi asked as he dodged a downward strike from one of the root members. "I don't know. He and Gaara should have been here an hour ago," Kankuro yelled out as he directed his puppet in combat while also trying to avoid being skewered by kunai. "Just keep them busy," he ordered as he cut the strings on his left hand and pulled out a kunai. Using his right hand to direct the puppet's head and the left to defend himself from the attacking shinobi, Kankuro found himself being pushed to his limits, and he couldn't risk using his trump cards as there were too many allies around. "Come on, hurry up guys," Kankuro begged as he and his platoon were pushed back a little more. Earth style. Earth whirlpool. The group of root shinobi were cut down considerably when a whirlpool was created in the middle of their ranks, where they were sunk into the ground and left to die underground. "Kankuro, it would seem you are in need of assistance?" Gaara drawled as he appeared next to his brother in a sand wave. Kankuro for the most part just sighed in well-founded relief, and even a few of the shinobi in his command backed off a little, letting the others have a go at the enemy. While that was going on, Naruto and his own little group of ninjas were spearheading an assault on Danzo. Fu, seeing the threat, pulled out a tanto and motioned for Torun to guard their superior, to which he got a nod. The large Yamanaka hopped down and immediately clashed swords with one of the light shinobi before he ducked underneath a strike from Naruto. Seeing an opportunity, Fu lunged to the side, catching both the shinobi and Naruto off guard, before he buried his tanto into the gut of a ninja off to the side. Killing one of the enemy, Fu pulled out a trio of shuriken and tossed them to another who deftly blocked them before getting blindsided by a shuriken that pierced the right side of his head. When Naruto saw two of his own shinobi fall, he immediately grew pissed. Pulling out his katana, Naruto activated his dujutsu and signaled for the remaining shinobi by his side to distract the Yamanaka. Nodding to his cage, the shinobi dashed forward and met with Fu in a display of sparks. The blonde-haired cage began to concentrate as the center tomo of his eyes turned into the shape of shuriken, with the center being red. His field of vision turned and changed till he could only see the chakra network of Fu. From there he watched. The chakra was smooth and not chaotic, showing that Fu held great chakra control and that he had at least high Chunin reserves. Smirking, the blonde began to draw the chakra back into its well using considerable effort. On the outside, Fu could feel something strange happening to his body. The usual strength and power he had come to associate with using chakra was momentarily disrupted and all but disappeared. He could feel his movements become sluggish and took a lot more effort to move. It became harder and harder to block and attack until something happened that made him, for once in his life, grow scared. His hands started to turn gray before growing cold and turned to ash right before his eyes and continued its way up and past his shoulders. "Ah!" the Yamanaka screamed out as he began to crumble into the ground. Naruto grew pleased when he heard the screams before he cut his concentration and raced forward to meet Danzo. Not wanting an outright confrontation, Naruto raised his hands, palm facing forward, and muttered, "Heavenly push," before a shockwave erupted from his hands and slammed into the sitting Danzo and his unlucky bodyguard. Torun didn't have a chance to survive as his bones began to crack from the pressure and his organs were turned into mush as they churned and slammed against the inners of his body. The Aburame was dead before the attack even hit. But Danzo was a whole other story. The Tsukikage gritted his teeth when the old warhawk stood back up and looked at Naruto impassively. What does it take to kill this guy? Naruto ranted before he had to dodge a fireball. Then a hail of kunai before blocking a strike from a tanto. Geez, for an old guy you move pretty fast. Naruto yelled out before a windblade was sent in a collision course to his gut. Acting quickly, Naruto jumped back and formed a cross sign before 5 shadow clones appeared. You know what to do, he stated before 2 of the clones nodded and dashed forward while the other 3 began to rush through hand signs. Danzo, not knowing what his enemy was doing, dodged a strike from the clone before blocking a strike from the other. Using honed experience, Danzo flicked his wrist, shooting a kunai to strike the clone he dodged before raising the same hand grab onto the other clone's shoulder and toss him into the ground where he poofed away. But grew wide-eyed when he heard a combined shout of, "Wind style! Raging tempest!" A gust of violent wind shot forward and impacted Danzo, the furious winds cutting deep into him, making him cough up blood and cry out in pain before he dropped to his knees. Naruto watched as his target dropped to his knees and met the old man with a steely gaze. "You brought this on yourself, you know," Naruto informed him, but was met with a chuckle from the broken man before he spoke. "Why, of course we did." Naruto was put on edge when Danzo's voice switched to a raspy, deep monotone. Till Danzo's body began to convulse and shift, bones breaking and realigning before it reshaped itself into another rude shinobi, utterly shocking Naruto. "Have fun with our present," he yelled out happily before he ripped his shirt open, revealing the suicide seal on his chest. "Shit, run. I wonder how the raid is going on," Hikari wondered out loud as she had awoken from her slumbering, where the other girls explained what was happening. The redhead sighed, seeing how she was of no help, and rested on the bed looking at the girls who were frantically trying to put their mind elsewhere from the raid. Knowing Naruto, they'd be fine, Tamari said, though she seemed like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Danzo was an enigma. His root were skilled and not much is known about Danzo's capabilities except about his Sharingan eye. So naturally the girls were afraid that something bad might happen. "But I'm sure everything's gonna be alright," Young said, fiddling with her shirt before she heard the sounds of fighting outside. "What the hell is going on?" Tayuya yelled as she made her way to the door, only to be cut short when the door was pulled open to reveal a yellow-haired teen, about 15 or so, wearing the standard Hikari Chunin flak jacket with black shinobi pants and shirt with arm bracers and shin guards. His Hikari Hite 8 was tied around his neck as he began to close the door frantically. "Daisuke-kun," Hikari said, surprised to see him burst into their room. "Danzo and his root are here. Most likely they want to capture Hikari-sama alongside everyone else," Daisuke said urgently as he began to rush through hand signs and an earth wall appeared behind the door. "Root? What are they doing here?" Yang asked as she grabbed her dragon blade and held it at the ready, but had to hold herself back when Daisuke grabbed the blade out of her hands and wagged his fingers in a no-no fashion. "Tsukikage-sama ordered me to watch over all of you, and that's what I'm gonna do," he proclaimed as he slammed his palm onto the walls before a seal began to glow and from the center of the floor an escape tunnel formed. "All of you in there now," he said, his voice stern but pleading. Yang grumbled something about dumb males and views before dropping down the tunnel alongside an equally pissed Tamari and Tayuya. But Hikari hesitated a moment when she reached the tunnel. "What about you?" she asked worriedly. But Daisuke gave a dismissive wave. "Don't worry, I was trained by Tsukikage-sama himself. I'll be fine," Daisuke reassured the girl, but she still didn't feel all that good at leaving him behind, but reluctantly did. When the girls were gone, he sealed the hole up before sighing. "And here I thought I'd have a nice break today," he muttered before pulling out 2 trench knives and dropping into a stance. Not a moment later, the wall of earth which guarded the door exploded and a swarm of rude shinobi entered the room. Daisuke frowned before pumping chakra to his blades and began to weave through the ninjas. It was difficult to say the least. There were too many of them, and Daisuke was trained for mid to long-range combat, not the up-close and personal deal. Blocking a Tanto strike, the silver-haired Chunin stabbed the rude shinobi several times using his unused hand and pushed the long-dead corpse away before doubling back when he felt a slash on his back. "Ah, that stings." Turning around, he blocked another swing before pushing the shinobi back and slammed his bronzed-knuckled hands into the gut of another rude shinobi before stabbing another one in the neck. But he couldn't rest though, as 3 rude shinobi attacked him as one. Acting quickly, the Chunin parried one attack and blocked the other, but it left him open as the last remaining enemy sliced right through his shoulder. Daisuke hissed in pain before head-butted the enemy and doubled back. "Crap, Tsukikage-sama," he muttered before another light shinobi entered the room and attacked them. With a cry-off, lightning release, cosmic shock. The three emotionless pawns were electrocuted before they could even turn. "Kaguma," Daisuke chirped happily. "Why do I feel so woe-see, and aren't you supposed to be with Tsukikage-sama?" The injured Chunin asked as Kaguma, a light Junin, inspected the wound. It was a trap. The Tsukikage is fine, but Kankuro-sama had been gravely injured alongside Team Hardshell, and my team suffered 3 casualties. The Junin informed Daisuke. "Sigh. This was a long night," he muttered. Daisuke immediately gripped onto Kaguma when he felt a sting when the Junin began to work on his wound. "Damn, that stings." Daisuke gritted his teeth as Kaguma began to work a little more slowly. "Don't worry, kid, we're getting out of here. The Tsukikage has recalled the forces. Black Knight contingency is under effect," Kaguma informed. Daisuke nodded his head through the pain. "I'm gonna level with ya, kid. There's a poison in your wound that's stopping your cells from regenerating." The Chunin gripped the hole on his shoulder a little bit before he gasped out, "So much pain, what the hell?" His voice sounded like a mixture of a sneeze and a wheeze. It wasn't long till Daisuke felt his eyelids grow heavy before his arms dropped limply by his side. Kaguma checked his pulse and found that there was none. Sighing, the older ninja closed Daisuke's eyes and muttered a prayer before standing up. "Today has been a long day," Danzo remarked the village with a look of growing regret. Regret for what? For not being strong enough to take the position of Hokage, for failing in his endeavors to make the village the strongest and mightiest. But as he stared at the village, a part of him was drawn back to simpler times, times when he and Hiruzen would play around and jump for joy as they thumbed their headbands. He and Hiruzen messing with their teammates and cackling madly when they pranked Kaharu or Kagami. Those were better days. Days where the horrors of shinobi were not introduced to them, days where their innocence shined brightly. Part of him almost felt like ripping out the eye that lay dormant in his bandaged socket as a way to apologize to Kagami for what he did to his son. Shisui was ever more talented and devoted to the village as Kagami, and he had destroyed his old friend's legacy and betrayed him. He sighed. He couldn't be thinking like this. The good of Konoha outweighs all others. He smiled a ghost of a smile when he remembered the meeting that took place moments ago. A miracle had happened. Both the civilian and shinobi council were both agreeing with each other. They were both outraged about the attack from the new village, the Hidden Light. An attack that Danzo had staged, pointing all the evidence to the hotel by the far reaches of Konoha that housed the majority of their forces in their safe haven. Many civilians were demanding war, but the shinobi were more calculating and less eager to fight, but they would eventually have to bend down to the will of the Hokage who, as weak as he is, would bend down to the will of Kaharu, Homura and the civilian council. He began spinning the cane in his hand as he walked away. "I love it when a plan comes together." Junin Commander Arashi Kazami was currently very busy. Ever since the mishap in Leaf and the village being discovered sooner than expected, he had been swamped. Anbu squads were sent out to patrol the borders alongside Junin. The brown-haired, middle-aged man sent a hand through his hair. The cage of the village would be arriving soon, and he'd have to make sure he went through as little trouble as possible. He sighed to himself as he looked out to the marvelous village which was the Hidden Light. It was built right on top of the old Uzushiyogakure in the land of Whirlpool, but their Tsukikage had gotten the old daimyo of the land to rename it into the Land of Light and built a ninja village in accordance to the name. Everything had been rebuilt. The houses, the shops and the many magnificent structures which served as the village's defense. They weren't going to make the same mistake as the old inhabitants. Those specific buildings had seals that would spew fire and wind jutsus at any foreign chakra signature not verified by a Chunin or Junin guard. The pristine lake which ran across it wasn't all so innocent as well. In the lake were several seals which would release a magnitude of water jutsus at any enemies that were capable of entering the village. Arashi sighed before he turned to the Anbu captain that was in his office. With a nod, the Anbu stiffened before reporting, "Sir, a letter from Konohagakure has been sent to us. It seems the village is getting aggressive towards the incident in their village. They may go to war with us in the worst-case scenario. Best case scenario, a few skirmishes between our villages but no direct confrontation. Arashi nodded slowly, having already thought of that but accepted it nonetheless. The brown-haired boy sighed. Whatever that happened in Konoha had to have been big if the Tsukikage alongside the spies in the hotel were engaged in combat. A part of him knew it had something to do with Root, the organization that his village leader had been so eager to learn more about. Right, get the Anbu commander in here. He needs to be informed of this as well. Nodding, the Anbu swiftly left right when a Chunin burst through the door. Arashi-san, Tsukikage-sama has returned with what's left of the den operatives we sent to Konoha. Arashi didn't waste any time and quickly shunshin out of the office. Damn it, I was so stupid. Naruto berated himself as he continued to lead the men by his side. No, you're not Naruto, you had no way of knowing it was a trap and you couldn't have stopped it any more than we could. Hikari tried to console Naruto as Gaara and Temari were watching after a charred Kankuro and Yang alongside Tayuya were doing what they can for the rest of the shinobi with what little medical knowledge they had. She's right, Tsukikage-sama, we were all tricked and blindsided by that man. It was unfortunate, yes, but remember we live the life of shinobi, which means death is a part of our life, Kaguma informed his cage while walking in step beside him. Kaguma was a man of average build and had black hair that was styled to slick back into spikes. He wore the standard Hikari-Kage uniform with his sleeves rolled up to reveal his den tattoo, showing everyone that he was a member of Hikari-Kage Special Forces Division of the Anbu, Defense and Espionage Network. Their training specifically in circles around infiltration and spying alongside low-level assassination. Though they were far from weak, since their job forces them to be behind enemy lines, they were extensively trained and taught to resist the harshest of tortures to the point where they'd reach insanity before they would ever spill any information of Hikari-Kage. I know, but still I can't help but feel it was my fault, Naruto stated with slumped shoulders and a sigh. Kaguma nodded solemnly. The job of a leader was always a hard one. In the end you'd blame yourself more than anything else. Naruto didn't know how to feel though, he had practically trained most of them. The young men and women under his command could all say that they were given some training under their cage. Even then Naruto had extensively trained the ninjas in the Konoha contingent, especially Daisuke. One of Naruto's more prominent students, though people would find it odd that grown men and women who were ninjas be trained and accepted a child as their superior. Simply speaking, Naruto saved them all. Most if not all were missing nins or orphans and would be soldiers and samurais from burnt and pillaged villages. Naruto had brought them all in, civilians and shinobi alike, and gave them a home and a place to stay. Trained them to defend their new home and was overall a shining beacon for all of them. They would gladly be led by the blonde boy after everything he did for them. Tsukikage-sama. Naruto was knocked out of his musing when he looked up to see Arashi, the Chunin commander, calling out to him. What's the situation? Naruto asked as he stared into the eyes of his appointed commander. Not good, Konoha has become aggressive, worst case. War, if not then at least some skirmishes and bad thoughts about each other when we go to sleep, the brown-haired man stated and watched as his leader's calculating eyes began staring up into the sun, showing all his powerful Dujutsu eyes. Arashi noticed how the middle tomo expanded and took the shape of 3 intersected sides. He immediately noticed how the seals glowed for a moment before they settled into an eerie blue, indicating that they were set on standby. Arashi's mouth was set into a thin line before he looked back at his cage. We can't risk war, though I may be powerful, I cannot fight an army myself, and our forces and village is still relatively new. Our ninjas may be exceptional, strong and borderline prodigies, but they still have yet to gain proper experience. Nodding, the Chunin commander knew his job already and went out to try and negotiate peace with Konoha. The blonde sighed before he wiped his face. Well, shit, he walked up to the gates before addressing the Chunin guard. Get Genin Team 7, they're heading to the Chunin exams. Off in the distance, Chunin Kakashi Hitaki was staring at the hotel with some level of seriousness, but really he was itching to jump back into his book. But had to restrain himself in the presence of Kurenai, lest he wanted to be trapped in a genjutsu for the rest of his life. So this is the place where the light shinobi were hiding at? Asuma asks as he examined the area. Everything was completely scrubbed clean except for the battle that took place. No tracks, no identification, no clothes, everything was gone. These guys are pretty good at covering their tracks, Asuma stated as he eyed the room with a scrutinizing gaze. Kurenai nodded, looking at the place with a frown. How did they even get into Konoha anyways? Shouldn't that be impossible? Should be, but it seems not, Kakashi drawled, but the two other Junins could see just how stiff and alert he was. It was subtle, but they had known him for years. He was taking everything with a scrutinizing gaze and making sure not an inch was left unchecked by his eyes. I hear the civilian council are fighting for war, Asuma stated, and he was met by the grim expressions of his companions. War? The white-haired copy Nin said nostalgically. Fools, the lot of them, Kurenai muttered as she went up the stairs to find any more clues. Both males sighed before they returned to searching for clues and whatnot. This is an outrage, Hokage-sama. For them to attack us, one of the strongest hidden villages. This was what Hiruzen Sarutobi had to sit through as he rubbed his face, wearing an almost pain-filled expression. A part of him felt like throwing a kunai into the hag's face but refrained against. Enough, the Hokage bellowed. Any and all matters of shinobi are to dealt with by me, the Hokage, or have any of you forgotten that? The third let out some of his impressive ki into the room, silencing the civilians and stiffening the shinobi. But Hokage-sama, what they did is a great offense to the village, Sumate cried out, and several of the clan heads nodded, but a few, mainly the Nara and Hyuga, remained silent. The old man sitting behind the desk gave a long hard stare at Sume, who was squirming under his gaze. In one fell swoop, the Hokage slammed his palm onto the desk and said out, his voice eerie calm, "And what? Are you so eager to go to war? Have you forgotten the blood, the screams, the howls of war that you wanted so eagerly?" Many people flinched at his tone while the advisors remained impassive. This meeting was put forth to deal with our security breach, but instead there are people preaching to me about the offense it is to attack our village and send spies into our midst? His voice rose by just pitch. One could hardly hear it, but it was there, and it was meant as a warning. We are ninjas. This is our life and work. This is a ninja village. This is to be expected. But this, what is going on here, is not meant to be in any village of our stature. Many people flinched at his statement, but the Hokage didn't stop. No, it was far from over. All of you are but spoiled ninjas and civilians in a time of peace. A time where your minds have forgotten what it was like for us during the Third Great War. And you are all willingly walking back into it. This new village may be small, but they would surely have allies, and their allies would have allies. And we would later be plunged back into the bloodbath that is war. The Hokage stood up from his chair and leveled everybody a stare for the ages. This meeting is adjourned. His voice was grave and disappointed, dramatical, but it got the job done. The Hokage left the council chambers with his advisors by his side. Hiruzen Hikaragakure has sent us a message saying that they would send their own genin team to the Chunin exams, Homuro reported as he stood by his old teammate. Hiruzen Sarutobi nodded and grew a thoughtful look. Allow them entry, and ask if their cage would like to join us. I don't trust them, but right now they're extended us an arm for peace. I have no need not to accept. Sakura Haruno was currently walking down the road with a far-off look in her eyes. I was so useless during the mission. I couldn't do anything, she muttered as she began to speed up in her walk. That's it, I'm going to train harder and I won't need to stand back anymore, she said with conviction before she heard a commotion happen not far from where she was. Curious, she made her way there and spotted the Hokage's grandson yelling at a boy roughly a year or two older than her wearing a Hite 8 with the kanji for light. He had black spiky hair with blue tips. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt with a red vest that had white wind-like motifs. He had black shinobi pants and open-toed sandals. On his back was a huge butcher knife that Sakura honestly didn't know how he could carry it. By his side was a girl whose beauty made Sakura blush. She was gorgeous. She had white spiky hair that dropped to the small of her back and a heart-shaped face. She had a slim figure with a very well-endowed body. She was wearing a gray zipped-up jacket with a mesh undershirt. She had two black fingerless gloves and was wearing a black skirt that dropped down to her thighs. She had knee-length open-toed sandals and had exotic green eyes. "Hey you, why don't watch where you're going?" Konohamaru yelled out as he pointed an accusing finger at the boy. The light genin just stared at Konohamaru blankly before he drawled out, "Aren't you the one who knocked into me?" His tone of his voice wasn't necessarily condescending but highly annoying, like her sensei Kakashi. Konohamaru grew a tick mark on his forehead. Don't you know who I am? I'm the Hokage's grandson. The leaf boy smirked victoriously as he stared at the boy down, expecting him to grovel down on his feet and begging for an apology. So? Konohamaru's face faltered and he stared at the guy with wide eyes. So? Apologize to me right now. The girl by his side giggled into her hand and the sound was so melodious that Sakura felt herself soothed by it. Kid, just because you're the Hokage's grandson doesn't mean we have to show you respect. That's earned, never given, she spoke. Her voice was soft and calming that whatever retort Konohamaru had was completely tossed out the window. He nodded his head dumbly. Oh great Setsuna. You got yourself another fanboy, the boy said in a lazy, aloof manner. Setsuna smiled and flicked Konohamaru's nose. Oh stop it Nobu-kun, plus I don't mind. He's cute. The said boy blushed before walking away with a glazed-over expression. Sakura didn't really know what to make of it all but knew one thing. Wait, I don't know who you are, but you guys are obviously foreign ninja, so I can't just let you walk around the village without a proper reason, Sakura said with a frown as she hesitantly stiffened when the boy Nobu gave her a pointed stare. But before he could reply there was a shout on the other end of the area. When they turned they saw another boy run up to them. He was dressed differently from the other two. He had on him a blue form-fitting shirt with a black jacket. On the back of his jacket was a wolf's head and he had on blue pants that dropped down to sandal-covered feet. The boy had spiky brown hair with crystal blue eyes. Ken-kun, Setsuna chirped when she saw the boy. Where the hell were you guys? I spent an hour lost all over the place because you guys decided to have a date. Screamed Ken as he flailed his hands into the air, exasperated. Setsuna blushed when she heard date and Nobu raised an eyebrow. We are not on a date, he stated. Ken didn't seem to buy it but nonetheless nodded, not really caring. Whose flat chest? Ken asked as he pointed to Sakura, not even caring if she heard or not. The said girl grew a tick mark and she felt like whipping out her kunai at him. Some girl asking us why we're here, Setsuna answered. Oh, Ken nodded his head and looked at the girl with a scrutinizing gaze. Sakura shied away from the gaze, feeling uncomfortable by it. Overly dressed up, there's hair conditioner all over her hair. Her chakra stores are minimal, far more smaller than an average ninja. Doesn't train, too focused on looks. She could be an infiltration agent at best, but with her looks she'd still suck at that, was Ken's assessment of her abilities. We're here for the Chunin exams, was Ken's clarification of what exactly their team were doing there. We're members of the Hidden Light Village, was what Ken said before he alongside his teammates walked off, not paying the girl a passing glance as they did what was asked of them. Sakura stared at their backs for a moment before shrugging and walking off. Little did she know that Sasuke Uchiha had watched the entire thing with the eyes of a hawk and his gaze was immediately dead centered on the one called Ken. He may not be a sensory ninja but he could tell with just one glance that he was strong. It was how he carried himself, back straight, face set forward and arms at the ready. It wasn't overconfidence that drifted off his aura, it was complete confidence in his abilities, the aura of a person who knows his limits, wherever they may be. Ken of the Hidden Light. I will fight you and I will beat you, was what he muttered before vanishing. It wasn't long till the group made it to the Ninja Academy where the test was being held. The Trip of Light genin stared up at the building with something close to apprehension. You guys understand that we are not supposed to make a scene, right? Relations with the villages aren't exactly at an all-time high, especially with the Hidden Light, Nobu said, his aloof expression gone, replaced with a seriousness that was a far cry to the personality he used earlier. Setsuna nodded while Ken snorted. Tsukikage-sama himself is our sensei, if anybody is gonna make a scene it would be us. That being said, Ken jumped forward with a cry and raced his way into the first phase of the Chunin exam. Why is he our teammate? Cried Nobu exasperatedly. Setsuna giggled and gave Nobu a kiss on the cheek. You say that now but I know he's your best friend Nobu, Setsuna said and giggled when she saw Nobu blush and the side of his cheek that was kissed was twitching. When Setsuna walked off, she made sure to have an extra strut in her step just for Nobu who was staring at her hips. What did Tsukikage-sama said about girls? He muttered to himself softly, oh yeah, don't knock it till you try it. Nobu blinked to himself a couple of times before darting forward and stepping into line by Setsuna's side, making sure to stay extra close. As they walked, they failed to notice the eyes of copycat Kakashi and Asuma staring at them. Not particularly boring holes in them, but enough so that they could take in every detail. They seem like normal kids. In fact, that Setsuna chick could be your cousin or something, Asuma replied. He gave a glance at his friend to see him staring a minute longer at the direction the light genin walked to before nodding his head. They don't seem that special, besides the mid-Chunin reserves and the obvious relationship between that Nobu and Setsuna, they seem like ordinary genin. Kakashi assessed before the two shinobi disappeared to report to their cage. Oh, so much paperwork, the blonde muttered as he stared at the large stacks of paperwork. Usually he wouldn't have that many things to sign considering all civilian matters were sent to the civilian council heads and all shinobi mattered go straight to the shinobi heads and all clan matters go to the clan heads. It was a really organized way to split the paperwork among each other, but lately the young Cage had placed several actions and contingencies into effect and everything was now pushed towards him. The 13-year-old pried his eyes away from the never-ending stack towards his Junin commander who was standing at the side, idle and at the ready. I can tell you're enjoying this, Naruto muttered dryly, and he saw a wobble of the man's shoulders for the briefest of moments before he returned to his stony facade. You're lucky you're the Junin commander. With that said, Naruto went to work singing all of them individually. He would have made several clones to do it, but the problem was that most of the clones would be unable to copy his signature because unlike the regular clones, his own clones are made with different personalities from the original, ergo, they do things differently from Naruto. So his own personal workforce was currently rendered useless against the paperwork. But before he even reached halfway through the page he immediately heard scuffling on the other side of the door to his office. When he looked up he was surprised to see Gaara there. Already knowing what he wanted, the blonde immediately spoke. You may leave Tasuna if you so wish, Gaara. I will not stop you. The redhead nodded but not before saying a quiet, thank you Naruto, before leaving the office. The Tsukikage sighed before turning to Arashi. We may have an alliance with Suna but that's only if it works out with Gaara and him becoming the case Cage. Arashi nodded at this. But there's still many more issues. If I were to visit Konoha there is a chance they may discover my identity and may or may not want me back or simply just immediately go to war. Understanding the severity of the situation, Arashi discreetly moved closer to the desk. I would decline, however that would seem too suspicious, so I'm going. I'll take extra precautions to make sure I would not be found out. If I were to stay here, the genin team we sent would be left to fend for themselves and I will not do that. The blonde stood up and walked from the desk to his door. With that being said, I'll be gone from the village so you'd need to finish up the paperwork for me. With a cheeky smile Naruto disappeared in a shunshin. Arashi felt his eyebrow twitch and could feel the laughter from the Anbu in the room. Damn it all, he muttered before he stared up at the stack of paperwork. Get the Anbu captain. I have a special assignment for him. Arashi commanded with a gleam in his eyes. These guys are weak, Ken muttered as he stared at the sea of genin in the room. He turned his eyes slightly to see Setsuna playing with her hair and Nobu glaring at all the boys who were staring at her. Ken couldn't help but sweat dropped when Setsuna bended over to do her sandals, unknowingly giving the group of men behind her a perfect shot of her ass. He could practically feel the rage boiling in Nobu as he stared them down, his hands hovering over his kunai pouch. Why are my teammates so weird? Ken cried, anime tears in his head but remained impassive on the outside. Sasuke-kun. Ken was immediately snapped into attention when he heard a shrill shriek break from the front of the room. He darted his eyes forward to see a group of Leaf genin all conversing and chatting as if they were gonna win the exams no problem. Idiots, was what the trio thought. While Ken and Setsuna were thinking that, Nobu's statement was more directed to the rain ninjas who were staring at Setsuna's still bent over ass with reckless abandon. Oh, he was just itching to skewer somebody. Ken, seeing red in his friend's eyes, immediately tried to mend things. Setsuna, can you stop bending over? The girl looked up at Ken funnily before nodding and straightening herself. Nobu's anger cooled only to spike again when Setsuna crossed her arms under her assets, pushing them upwards where the rain ninjas could stare at them in all its glory. This time Ken cried openly, what the hell is this shit? Alright you maggots, that's enough. From where he heard the gruff voice of what he thought was a bear, Ken saw their proctor for the first part of the exam, Ibiki Morino. The first thought that went through his head were, is he part bear? And, does he even eat normal human food? Really, the guy looked like he went through WrestleMania 5 times and walked away with the title. Bear Apocalypse. The first part of the exam is about to begin. With no more waiting, Ken pushed himself off the wall he was leaning against and went to take his seat. Number 30 minutes of intense monologue later. What in the name of Tsunadeheim's boobs is this? Ken cried as he stared at the paper on his desk. What would you do if your squad and your teammates find yourself in an enemy brothel house and in need of medical care? What's more is that all the women want to jump into your pants, so how do you get the aid that you so desperately need while remaining a virgin? Why would we need to know this? Ken whispered, and he sent an incredulous stare at Ibiki, who smirked when he saw it. Anko had a crap ton of fun writing this year's test papers, was what Ibiki thought, shaking his head clear of the image that was not implanted into his brain, and immediately set to work. He knew the real reason of the test, so now he could immediately get to work. Making discreet hand seals underneath his desk, he thought, "Kowear me. I have no idea if this is correct. Just so you know, secret technique." Invisible eye. Immediately an almost invisible eye formed by his side and began to hover above the room. Seeing the answers in his new eye, Ken immediately went to work jotting everything down. Setsuna, however, was blushing madly as she read all of the stories. They ranged from intimately private to full-blown embarrassment to answer. Shaking herself out of her stupor, she gave nervous glances to the people around her before she discreetly placed a hand on the bench she was sitting on, and a thin line of black ink formed. It climbed up a person's shoulder before attaching itself to his hand and fingers. When that was done, the other end of the line climbed up Setsuna's shoulder and connected to her hands and fingers before they began to mimic the person's movements, allowing her to copy down the answers. Meanwhile, Nobu blinked at the questions on the test papers. He blinked once, twice, thrice. Hell, he could blink 1,000 times and he would still have a hard time trying to believe it. If you were tied to a bed with an infiltration agent sitting on your lap wearing nothing but her bra and panties, what do you do? Note she had also tied your fingers, restricting you from forming hand seals, however she left your mouth open. How do you manipulate her into cutting you free using only said mouth? P.S. You may use your tongue. What? Nobu's brain promptly shut down as he stared at the question. His eyes glazed over and his jaw dropped to his desk. Many of the sentinels by the side of the room were snickering to themselves at his reaction. However, Nobu couldn't stop himself from fantasizing him and Setsuna in that position. Him tied up, Setsuna sitting on top of him, naked and licky. Holy shit. Shaking his head clear of these thoughts, Nobu made a long and exasperated sigh. It's like Young-sama went and unloaded all her crazy dreams into this one piece of paper, he thought with a shiver. Looking down the questions, he noticed they grew increasingly ridiculous. What is the rank you would give yourself in bed? F, D, C, B, A or S? And if you're really that confident, SS. Again, Nobu's brain shut down and he felt his hand shake uncontrollably as he was assaulted by images. While that was happening, a thin trail of blood flowed from his nose. Dear mother of Tsunadeheim's boobs. Finally composing himself, Nobu took a shaky breath and weaved through hand seals before he stopped on the rat. Cutting a thin line of blood, the red liquid flowed from his hands and latched itself onto a random person before dissolving into him. The genin's eyes widened a fraction before it dimmed down. Blood possession jutsu, Nobu thought before he began to memorize the answers to the test. But once again his brain shut down when he read the answers. Genin number 77 is out and somebody clean that blood up. Ken couldn't stop his laughter as he pointed a finger at the disheveled form of Nobu. His hair was sprouting in all directions with a copious amount of tissue paper in his nose. The boy glared at Ken, his hand inched closer to his butcher knife but took a calming, albeit shaky, breath. Ken, when we get back to Hikaragakure I'm gonna drag you down Carolina River and back. Ken shuddered when Nobu made the threat. Carolina River was a man-made raging river used to teach Chunin chakra control by making them run up and down the river. It was both a terrifying and exhilarating experience, one that Ken didn't want to be a part of. You don't have the jurisdiction. Ken rebuked, but all he got was a sinister smile and a feeling of dread. As Ken continued to blanch and whisper words of comfort to himself, the proctor for the exams, Anko Mitarashi, continued to speak, ignoring the light genin in favor of scaring everyone else. In this forest the true tests of the Chunin exams begin. You will be tested on your survival instincts, your teamwork, your tactics and your overall will to survive. Without further ado, I'll leave you all to it. The all-too-happy tone in her voice unnerved most participants, but Setsuna simply giggled to herself while the two boys on her team continued to bicker. Seeing as though the boys didn't want to line up with the rest of the genin to receive the scrolls, she took the initiative and did it instead. There's no point in fighting a losing battle. She knew better than to break up one of their verbal spouts, because when left unfinished they could turn into very destructive spars. It wasn't particularly long till she reached the booth, more accurately one person behind the booth. When she was about to move, she was forcefully pushed back by a rather irate Uchiha, judging by the fan on his back, growling out a rather menacing, "Move out of the way." Now usually she would mind, but in this case, considering the scroll was already half out when she was about to grab it, she was capable of gathering information in at least one team with what scroll. When the Uchiha had walked away with a heaven scroll originally meant for her team, she smiled to herself. Even if she got a heaven scroll as well, at least she could narrow the search by one team. She stood in front of the booth with a smile and said in a sweet voice, "Can I have my scroll please?" The Tsukikage is very strict on manners sometimes. "Tsukikage-sama, do you think it is wise to enter Konoha after the incident?" Kagaya, a light Chunin chosen to be a part of her cage's escorts, asked. "You shouldn't doubt the Tsukikage's wishes, Kagaya-hime." The woman frowned and immediately moved to retort, but Kaguma stopped her with on her shoulder. "Honestly, you two, you're in the presence of the cage and you want to fool around, and Ichiro. While it is good to have faith in your leader, sometimes it's better to ask than remain quiet." Ichiro was successfully cowed the moment the den captain had said, "honestly," and retreated behind his cage where he knew he was safe. Meanwhile, the blonde cage was watching his three escorts with mirth dancing in his azure eyes. He was dressed in the normal cage robes, only that it was completely white with the kanji for Tsukikage on it. "My ninjas are all so amusing," the blonde thought. As he did, he let his eyes travel down the group. Kaguma was dressed the same as before, while Kagaya was dressed in a slightly altered kunoichi uniform of the Hidden Light. She had on the regular white flak jacket and wore a navy blue skirt that stopped at her knees. From her ankle there was a chainmail mesh that stopped halfway up the bottom of her leg, and on her waist was the standard kunai and shuriken pouch. On her back was a tanto with her Hikarikager headband tied to her upper arm. Kagaya also had long black hair that was tied up into a braid that stopped at the small of her back. Ichiro was wearing the standard Junin outfit, but on his arms were bracers that would dispense kunai through a mechanism designed by Konkuro. The best part about it was that it used a scroll to provide the ammunition rather than depositing the kunai by hand, making it both easier to use and more practical in combat. Ichiro had flat, messy hair with a pair of sunglasses adorning his face. To answer your question, Kagaya, yes, I do believe it is a wise choice. Better to heal the wound when it's recent than when it's been left to simmer and dry, Naruto responded after he was done. The kunoichi seemed to accept that answer and nodded while Ichiro went back to his position next to her. Seeing as his escorts were returned back to duty, Naruto did a double check on the armor under his robes. Though he wanted to make peace with the Hidden Leaf, he wasn't going to go there completely vulnerable. Kami would kill him if he did. The Shodem Tsukikage walked forward, his guards in a triangle formation around him. The blonde adjusted his hat to make sure none of his spiky golden locks was shown inside to himself. Yet as he eyed the two bickering Junin and one very annoyed den captain, he couldn't help but be drawn back to the past. 3 years ago. Naruto, age 10. Naruto-san, the named boy, turned around just in time to see Hikari dressed in an elegant white kimono stroll up to him. "Naruto-san, what are you doing up here? You'll get a cold." What she meant was that Naruto was currently perched on top of one of Uzushiogakure defense towers around morning with freezing cold wind blowing about. Despite that, the blonde couldn't help but frown in the way she addressed him. "Hikari, you know you don't need to call me san, right?" The redhead blushed to herself and nodded. "Sorry, it's just, I'm still getting used to the new life and all." Naruto nodded before pulling out a kunai and carving a symbol on the top of the tower. "What are you doing?" Naruto turned to Hikari when he had finished with his carving and answered, "I'm marking which towers need to be demolished. This one blocks a perfect path for those on the east wing to travel to the market district in the center of the village." She nodded, understanding it and seeing the logic on something like that. "You seem troubled." The blonde didn't even bat an eyelash to her statement. It happened so many times he just stopped asking the hows. This new village we're making, is it right? Hikari smiled at him, sat down next to him. Do you feel it's right? I don't know, I mean, this place was destroyed during the Third World War, and to just go and make a new village without even developing at least a stable shinobi force is insane. I mean, most of the troops are genin and… He was interrupted when Hikari placed a finger on his lips. Her lips stretched in amusement. I asked how you feel, not what you think. The blonde boy nodded with a smile, his eyes staring up into the moon with longing in his eyes. This is where my clan was made, where my mom was born, and where my ties will never falter. I feel that this is the right choice for me, at least. I can't say for the villagers and everyone else that joined me, though. Naruto's face adopted a worried look. The moment villagers and people that he had helped came and asked to take residence in his village, he had been worried, for both their safety and well-being. Hikari frowned and didn't plan on hiding it as Naruto saw it immediately. Have some more faith in your people. The way how Hikari said, your people, left Naruto shocked for a moment, and Hikari capitalized on it. Yes, I do mean, your people, they look up to you, Naruto, you're their hero. They will follow you no matter how hard things get. Just worry about how you lead them and have faith in your people to understand. Having said her words, Hikari stood up and walked away quietly. Naruto continued to sit up on the tower throughout the night, his eyes constantly drifting up to the moon, a small smile playing at his lips. Present day. Thank you, Hikari, Naruto whispered to himself, so quiet not even the highly trained ears of Kaguma could hear it. Naruto was a proud Kage, and he had hoped he had lead his people right. What are these guys made of? Ken ducked down underneath of a devastating haymaker before slamming his leg into his enemy's face. His kunai was out and held menacingly at the grass genin, but it seemed his opponent didn't care as he rolled forward and attacked with a horizontal slash. Ken jumped up into the air before calling out his technique, water style, water bullet jutsu. He spat out 3 bullets of water at his opponent, however his opponent successfully dodged them. All a part of the plan, Ken grinned before going through a quick set of hand signs, mud style, mud whirlpool. The mud around the grass genin, which had been caused by the water bullets, churned and swirled to life around him before he was sucked into the ground with a final cry. The light genin sighed to himself in relief, Ken, look out. The boy snapped his eyes open just in time to dodge a barrage of kunai. Setsuna. Nobu barked out when he saw that Ken had jumped away safely. The girl nodded before performing a series of hand signs, ink style, ink grapple jutsu. Tubes on her sandals began sprouting out before several large ink arms spread out and tried to grab onto the grass genin. He successfully dodged them, however completely missed Nobu behind him, reeling his butcher knife back, dance of the eagle, talon strike. He sent his blade forward, striking against his opponent's back, however not to cleave but instead to use as a spring for him to then land a kick on the genin's face before spinning the blade around and into his gut. The 3-man team landed together on the forest floor. Ken was breathing hard while Setsuna was still 100%. Nobu, however, his eyes were cold and calm, his posture screamed, end it now or I'll end you, and he growling to the last genin alive. The boy looked at the light genin, his eyes fearful and hollow. You killed my friends, he whispered. He was distraught, that was understandable. You bastards, I'll kill you. He darted forward, his eyes screaming bloody murder, and within a blink Ken was by his side, his kunai in his gut and a sad smile on his face. We killed your friends, but now you can go and see them. Ken watched as the light died in his eyes before turning away. Setsuna, did you find what scroll they had? The girl nodded before pulling out a heaven scroll. A heaven? That's lucky. Ken frowned, knowing luck meant bad news. Nobu sent him an agreeing nod before he began walking off. We need to be moved. We're double timing it to the tower. 2-hour breaks and no complaints. This is nothing compared to the conditioning we went through at the academy. The 2 genins nodded before disappearing, but not before Ken did a simple earth jutsu to bury the grass genin. In death we are all brothers. With a silent prayer for the unlucky genin, the group moved with haste to the tower. They seem well trained, the Hokage muttered under his breath. Kakashi behind him alongside Ibiki. They're just a couple of brats, Ibiki answered, his gruff voice giving no emotion away. Kakashi, the Hitaki prodigy, looked to his friend, batchmate, and raised an eyebrow. Those brats may be brats, but they have a lot of potential, and as it seems by the little show with the burial, they seem to wear their emotion on their sleeves. Especially that Ken kid, I could see it, His heart was going out to that boy who had lost his team, Kakashi reported. At the same time he couldn't help but compare the kid to Obito. Maybe so, but their teamwork could use some work and their techniques, though powerful, seemed to be slightly off in control, Ibiki retorted, his scarred face showing how he didn't see the genin as a village-wide threat like how everyone else were doing. Yes, it may seem so, the old Hokage began, puffing out circled from his pipe, but they are not registered as enemy nor friend. They are a threat, not because of their skills or abilities but because of whom they are affiliated with. The old man looked up at his subordinates, old and weary eyes turning hard as steel with the glint of a war veteran, a soldier who had been through 2 wars and seen the village from the very beginning. This is more than just us. I don't know why, but when I look at the hidden light, when I see those 3 genin, when I simply wait now to meet their Tsukikage, I can't help but feel something. The Hokage wandered his eyes off to a map, staring at a certain place off past sea country. Hokage-sama? Ibiki asked, slightly wary when he saw where the Hokage was looking. To have chose there of all places to go. A frown marred the old features of the Hokage, his wrinkles deepening along with his thought. Uzumaki? That word was whispered so low that Kakashi was sure he wasn't supposed to hear it. What is going to become of our village? The Sandame? No, here is in Sarutobi sighed for what felt like his whole life. I'm too old for this shit. Nay, what was that for? Ken whined as he cradled the sizable bump on his head while also glaring with as much venom as he could at the sole cause of his pain. Nobu, I'm going to rip your head off someday. His voice was low and quiet, but the boy heard nonetheless. And what makes you think you could beat me? Nobu replied hotly, his voice resonating with his smirk. Ken frowned before springing up to his feet, his hand outstretched and pointing at Nobu with a determined glare. I swear I will beat you one of these days or I'm going to die trying. A sigh broke the two out of their bickerings. Both boys turned their heads around to look at Setsuna looking down on the ground while twiddling her fingers, but she wasn't really the main focus. Instead it was the form of their Tsukikage standing there with his white robes billowing in the wind and an irritated tick mark on his forehead. Both boys blanched before exchanging glances with each other. This is your fault, they said together, almost immediately after getting wax on their heads. Setsuna watched as her sensei and Kage began to lecture and berate his 2 students, and her teammates, before sighing, I'm glad I wasn't dragged into. Setsuna, don't think you're walking away from this. Her face became ghostly white and her mouth became slacked. She turned her head only to feel the air knocked out of her lungs when she saw Lady Hikari there with her hips bent and her eyebrow cocked. The next few minutes all could be heard were the pitiful wailing of Team 7. Ken slowly roused himself off his slumber before coughing and grabbing his aching leg. Damn, we've been running non-stop since yesterday and we still have a ways to go. The brown-haired boy pulled out a scroll from his backpack and leaned against the bark of a tree for support. He noticed how Nobu's traps had been set all around their camp before the said teen dropped down in front of him. They both snorted at each other, Nobu because Ken was being lazy and Ken because Nobu still had his hair in a mess. The two shared a glance before Nobu went off to go sleep. When the teen began snoring, Ken returned his eyes to the scroll in his hands, and as he did he couldn't help but frown. I'm among the last of the Kawermi clan. Most of our techniques were lost during the bloodline purge. Only these scrolls are left. Ken pulled the scroll shut gently like a rare artifact, which it is, before clipping it back to his pouch. Tsukikage saved us, he protected us especially on that day. Ken, whether he wanted to or not, was driven back to a time he'd rather forget but could never bring himself to. Flashback. Fire, that was all he could see, a big red-hot flame burning through wood and flesh without. That was all he smelled, thick and heavy in the air. Screams, that was all he could hear, all long and painful. The boy crouched down low, his 12-year-old mind trying to think of a way through the mess of blood and pain. His little sister was by his side, clinging to his hand like her life depended on it, and really it did. Ni-san, what's going on? She asked quietly, tears brimming in her eyes as she noticed several dead bodies of family members, bloodied and battered on the ground with slash marks and kunai jutting out here and there. The girl whimpered as one of them suddenly shot up, screaming before he plopped back down, the lights in his eyes completely gone. Ni-san. She was shushed by a finger when her brother moved forward and plucked one stray kunai from the wall. She watched as her brother held it defensively to his chest while his other hand was out defensively in front of her, Her brother's only instinct had always been to protect her, and after their parents died, she couldn't really bring herself to remember it. Ken looked from one side to the other, making sure there were no mist ninja anywhere near them. There was sweat dripping down his forehead and his feet were barely kept steady. His gritted teeth scratched against each other as he took calm steps forward. As he did, he kept one arm in front of his sister. His father's last dying words kept repeating his ears like a broken record. He knew each and every detail would be ensnared in his head forever. From his father's large hole in his chest to his mother's neck being pierced by a kunai. His father's bloodied and trembling lip letting a wheezed breath shift through before he looked at Ken with the eyes of a dying man with one last wish. Protect your sister. His mouth stopped working and his eye rolled back into his head before he died. The boy growled under his breath. He wanted to kill, he wanted to fight, he wanted to avenge his father, his mother, his friends. He wanted to kill his vengeance on the mist, turning a once lively and happy village into a desolate wasteland. The ground that was once fertile was salted and burned. The houses that once sheltered families were shattered like broken pieces of a mirror. The faces of people he once knew were twisted and lifeless, forced to forever be left with an expression of fear and shock. Ken stepped forward slightly, his back was drenched with sweat, and kept close to whatever wall that was nearby. He positioned his body slightly to the left before moving his sister, Aiko, behind him. Stay here, he whispered before rounding a corner and taking a step back, his guard instantly up. There weren't as many bodies on this street as the one he and his sister had just exited, but the blood was still fresh and the bodies had yet to lose their color. These are definitely still new, probably a couple of minutes ago. He ducked low to the ground. He hadn't trained to be a ninja originally. His family were carpenters, leaving the shinobi work to the higher families. However, he went through basic combat drills in the case of a possible need of a large amount of ninjas. Then the militia, people like him, who receive basic training, would be enlisted among the regular forces. Ken quietly moved forward, making as small of target as he could while not making himself look utterly ridiculous. When he was sure that there was no one there, he rapped against the wall twice before his sister walked out and quickly ran to him. However, nothing really works out now, does it? Ken's eyes widened before he sprang forward. Aiko, get down now. His sister, thankfully, complied and ducked down to the ground as quickly as she could right before she would have been peppered by kunai. A mist ninja shimmered into view in front of her, a tanto in his hand and ready to strike down on her. No, you bastard, get away from her. Ken immediately latched onto his back, his kunai trying to slit his throat but also missing by an inch. The ninja grabbed Ken's arms before he slammed the boy down onto the ground as hard as he could. The mist ninja palmed his kunai before throwing it at Ken. He hissed out in pain before doing the same with his kunai. The ninja dodged, but as he did, Ken was already up and running, the kunai in his shoulder gone, and was held above the mist ninja. The ninja smirked before he twirled to the side and slammed Ken into the wall. When he saw the kid on the ground was close to death, he turned to the sister. Well, kid, sorry about this, but demons like you don't deserve to live. The ninja walked forward quietly. His steps were heavy, but the smile on his face was demonic. The girl trembled as she stared at the man, her eyes drifting to her brother who lay dormant on his side. Ni-san. Tears were brimming down her cheeks as she lifted her arms to shield her face. She waited, for an eternity, for a long and silent moment she waited. She heard the sounds of metal hitting flesh, the squelch of blood splattering on the ground before silence, again. She opened her eyes slowly and her eyes grew wide and shocked. Her brother was in front of her, his left shoulder pierced by a kunai and his hands outstretched to protect his sister. Don't worry, Aiko, your Ni-san will keep you safe. He won't let you get hurt. Ken dropped down onto his back before delivering a kick to the ninja's face and forcing the kunai out of his shoulder. You little runt, I'm gonna kill you. The man launched forward, his blade now going to Ken's neck, and the Kawermi boy was cornered. He couldn't run, he couldn't dodge, so he had to take it, for his sister. He smiled, resolution in his eyes before he whispered to his sister, run, okay Aiko. The blade inched closer and closer before, clank, the ninja's eyes shot wide open before he was kicked in the gut far more painfully than when the civilian hit him, and was sent spiraling back into the ground. Ken's mouth was agape and he stared at the imposing figure in front of him. He was dressed in a long white haori with the kanji for sage on his back and orange flames licking the helm and sleeves. His face was obscured with a hood, and the man slowly turned to them, his eyes piercing into Ken's soul. Go, I've rounded as many villagers as I could on the southeast exit. I suggest you go there, besides company is coming soon. His voice was calm and flowed out of his mouth. With a nod, Ken didn't even look back as more mist ninja dropped into the clearing. He had a feeling that the guy wouldn't die as easily, and since he saved him and his sister, he could trust him if only for a while. Flashback end. Now here he was, a genin for the Hidden Light, his little sister and him, out in Konohagakure no Sato in participation of the Chunin exams and sitting out in the middle of the Forest of Death with his team. Despite himself, he couldn't help but chuckled. Tsukikage, he sure is a great man. He stared up into the sky before looking back down. For the Tsukikage, he thought softly before going back to guard duty. How's everything going? A shadowed man asked as he sat on his throne. In front of him were 3 of his best agents. The Uchiha had fought with one of our dummy teams and he emerged victorious, if only barely. If our team had been given the all-clear to kill, he would surely be dead. Though his face was veiled in darkness, you could tell he was frowning. That is unpleasant, he said, his voice remained stoic. And what of the light genin? The 3 ninjas looked at each other before the one who spoke before began. They don't seem to be anything special, sir. They move like a normal genin team. As in they watch each other backs, however their coordination needs work. They tend to show very little techniques when dealing with opponents unless they deem it necessary. When using their techniques, however, they seem to show quite an impressive reserve of chakra considering the techniques they use, however they seem to lack some refined control over their techniques. Again the old man frowned before he cupped his chin. What are you planning, Uzumaki? To send a mundane genin group amidst us, the shadowed man stood, revealing his face to be Danzo, and he spoke loud enough for all to hear him. Listen and listen well. I want you to disguise yourselves as civilians and spread the word of the Light's attempt to assassinate the Hokage. Hiruzen felt it prudent to keep the Light's earlier incident out of the public. That would be his downfall. Create uneasiness, and then I want some of the root members in the Anbu to start putting people on edge. The operatives nodded before disappearing. The old man smiled briefly before moving away. Now it's just a waiting game. Lady Hikari, what brings you here? Hikari stopped for a while before looking at the source of the voice. It was Yang. Her yellow hair was tied into a high ponytail, with her left side having 3 strands of hair slightly covering her face. She was wearing her usual white blouse, however her jacket was nowhere to be found. She replaced her skirt with black shorts and her dragon blade was strapped to her back. Hikari frowned for a moment. You know you don't need to call me Lady Hikari, right? We are friends after all. Hikari had changed her look. In the village she usually dealt with domestic affairs. Though she was young, she had experience dealing with politics that Naruto liked to describe as that civilian-made bullshit meant to piss off people, and because of this she now wore an orange kimono with roses adorning the fabric. Her hair was in a ponytail with 2 long bangs framing her face. She was a true image of a princess. Yang smiled briefly before shifting over. No can do. I'm part of the regular forces again, so I have to address you properly and professionally. Yang was a Chunin going on Junin in the next month if she passed. She joined up with Naruto and the rest to Konoha to simply complete a job and help out. Hey blonde cow, you left me with shitty cashier guy. The 2 girls turned around to see Tayuya. She wore a gray vest over a white long-sleeved shirt with black shinobi pants that had white wrappings on her ankles. Red, you better stop calling me that, Yang muttered through gritted teeth. The redhead gave her a blank look before growing a shit-eating grin. Nope, Yang growled, and before she could attack her, Hikari spoke up. What were you 2 doing? The 2 girls looked at each other before shrugging. The Junin commander asked us to order extra kunai coming in the next shipment. The whole talk of war is putting a lot of people on edge. Yang replied. She was nervous like everyone else. Even Tayuya, because war wasn't a joking matter. If they were to get plunged into war with Konoha, there was no doubt that the other villages would capitalize on the opportunity and start another world war. Something like that was a very serious matter. The shitheads up at Testosterone Central are clambering everybody to red alert. Homeland contingency is being prepped and nearly every single one of the fuckers down by Southside are clambering for the bunkers already, Tayuya said. Her distaste for the rich Southsides were clear in her voice. Hikari frowned at her before chiding her for her language. Tayuya rolled her eyes but kept a small smile as the younger redhead began to talk about how a woman should behave. Yes, I know, Whirlpool Princess. Hikari's frown became a pout as she mentioned what the civilians loved to call her. She did have the princess look to her after all. You girls are meanies, Hikari muttered before walking away, leaving behind two wildly laughing Chunins. But as they continued through the day, they missed the shock of white and black pass through the roofs above them. Have you heard anything? A voice crackled through a radio on his neck. I have found priority target, should I engage? He replied, his voice emotionless and his body hugging the shadows for cover. Danzo-sama has all his cards placed. Priority target is a no zone till the final rounds. Do you understand, Sai? The voice asked, just as emotionless as him. Yes, I understand. Sai gently came out of the wall he was hiding behind before he performed an ink technique that transformed his clothes into something more civilian-like. I will keep visual observation.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.